Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, where we discuss the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online, except this week. I guess we are still discussing those films, but this is our annual top movies of the year episode. I am John Negroni, as always, from San Francisco Bay Area, film editor for theyoungfolks.com. He is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the freelance writer you love to love. It's Will Ashton.
What's up?
We have a long anticipated episode here, Will. I feel like the top 10 movies of the year, it tends to be one of our biggest of the year.
Sure. Makes sense.
People always want to, they want to jump in. They want to be like, all right, guys, just give me the brass tacks. What do I need to know about?
Yeah, let's cut the fluff. Let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, they didn't. How many hours of Cinemaholics did we do this entire year, helping you all decide what you want to watch on a weekly basis?
Having, articulate discussions about these thought-provoking films, and you just want to, cut the fat and get right to the good stuff, which I can respect. But
some people would say the fat's the good stuff, but that's not what we're gonna get here.
Like us losing our minds talking about Space Jam 2, I think that's the heart of Cinemaholics, but people can disagree.
Space Jam 2, don't give away my number one already.
Sure, there you go.
All right, well, yeah, as the episode implies, we're going to go through our top 10s. It's going to be a little bit different this year. Now, I know in previous years, our top movies episode, sometimes we go all out. We're just like, we got voicemails, we have listeners calling in, we do all kinds of extra stuff. We're not doing anything different. We're not doing anything like extra this year, mainly because...
Well, speak for yourself. I might go extra. Well, who knows?
You have a couple of unplanned, gimmicks and bits.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, okay. I will hope for the worst. But no, my excuse this year, last year was more of the pandemic. It was just sort of like, let's just keep it simple. We had 3 people, us and Abigail Chessie, and that was good enough. I feel like we had a good rundown there. This year, it's just like I got a wedding coming up.
Sure.
Wedding planning, full swing. I really just prioritizing all of that.
I got you.
So
I can understand.
This will still be great.
Well, the listeners understand that's a whole other discussion, I guess.
Yeah, we'll do the wedding episode at some point.
Put it on the air. I'd appreciate that. That'd be fun.
Yeah, you should just record it, just be kind of like, yeah, here we go. I'm still under the assumption that you're coming. It's like one of those things. This bit will never get old. The day of the wedding, I'll be like, he'll be here any minute.
Yeah. Melissa's like, is he coming? He's like, oh, hang on. Like, your dad's like checking his watch. Yeah, all your groomsmen are just sitting casually. And then sure enough, I come running down from the airport, all that. Yeah,
with a microphone in your hand. All right. Well, let's first start off with what's our general impression of 2021 in film? Got to get it out of the way. 2020 was a disruptive year, the most disruptive year of our lifetimes. 2021 was interesting. Yeah. It was like an extension of that disruption, and then a lot of waves. Some high points, some low points. Going back to theaters, theaters kind of being in this weird limbo state that they're in right now, where some movies like Spider-Man: No Way Home will make tons of money, but then other movies like Nightmare Alley or Encanto or all kinds of other things will barely make anything. So we're in a weird time, but generally, Will, what's your take on 2021 in film?
In film, it was interesting. I think looking back on it, or at least living through it, I felt it was a fairly underwhelming year. A lot of the bigger films I was looking forward to from now like 2 years prior didn't always live up to my expectations, and there were some films that I liked, but I think I didn't like as much as you, or maybe as much as I had hoped. But making this list and compiling all the films I had seen, either from this past year or from TIFF the year prior, that I finally had finally come out, I was able to look back and be like, what? And also Sundance from the previous year, and be like, what? This was a good year. It wasn't a great year, I don't think. But I think there are a lot of really outstanding films that came out this year, and I have 10 films on my list here that I feel really confident in, and I feel like are worth celebrating for a variety of reasons, both similar and different. So, overall, I'm thinking 2022. I'm hoping, I don't want to jinx it, but I think 2022 is going to be an outstanding year for film, just based on what's coming out. But this year is pretty solid overall. How about you, though?
Well, I have to be clear, my list is probably similar to yours in the sense that there aren't a lot of blockbusters here. I don't think any, really, at least not in the traditional blockbuster sense. And that's not because I didn't like any of the blockbusters this year. We'll be going through our honorable mentions as we usually do right before we get into our number ones. We're going to start going through our list. And then once we get to number one, we'll go through all of our honorable mentions. And for me, I'll basically get into like, okay, here's my favorite superhero film of the year. Here's, stuff like that. But yeah, looking at my list, I mean, two things stick out to me the most, and that's I think 2021 was a fantastic year for animation. I know you and I are a little bit contentious on this, but I just think there were so many great animated films that came out here, so many animated films in my honorable mentions, to the point where I actually think it's a very competitive award season. And speaking of which, I think that we had a really good award season too. I'd say half the movies on my list are from award season, just about. And that's really great to see. I'm always happy to see that. A24, I think, had a much better year this year than last year by and large. Like last year, I think Minari was like kind of the only A24 film I think really stood out to me, unless I'm missing one. But this year I have multiple A24 films. So, good year for Neon. Have a couple of Neon films on here too. I just think it was a good year. I think that if there was anything that was underwhelming to me, it was probably this summer. I think the summer movie season was pretty weak. I feel like spring wasn't that disappointing because we kind of knew that spring wasn't going to be that great. And there were a few things that came out in the spring that did kind of catch my eye that I did enjoy. I enjoyed the, like Cruella and Ryan the Last Dragon and Godzilla versus Kong. And they were my favorite films, but
sure.
Yeah, I had a good time with them enough. And I think that, there's one film that you recently just saw that came out in May that I thought was like really great, called Bo Burnham Inside. But we don't have to have a big old discussion because I know you're not the biggest fan of that one.
It was fine. Yeah. I don't think I was quite as taken by some of those titles that you mentioned, but I do remember the spring having this sense of like, oh, like we're vaccinated, we can go to the movies again somewhat comfortably, and that was a short-lived high. But even if the movies weren't terrific, there was that comfort of being back in the movie theater again. A little bit more safely than before. And, I look back on that time somewhat fondly for that reason.
Right. It was very wistful.
Sure.
Like pre-Delta, especially like June,
Right.
The whole month of June, I think we were just getting back into the swing of things, starting to get a little bit more comfortable. And
yeah. So
it all just kind of switched up from there.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I guess I do look at each season a little bit differently. I do agree that the summer movie season was pretty underwhelming this year, but I'm not quite as taken by the animated films as you were, but there are two animated films on my honorable mention list that we'll discuss in a bit. But yeah, I think it was a really good year for documentaries. And I think there are a lot of really solid filmmaker-driven films that came out this year that I really, really liked a lot. So, I mean, had its highs and had its lows, but some good stuff came out this year. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. I gotta say, what for me, documentaries didn't hit me as hard as they did you this year. That'll be a big difference, I think, between our lists. There are no documentaries in my top 10. A few in my honorable mentions, though. There was one that was almost in my top 10, just barely missed it, kind of a last second switch up, because I think that there was one on my list that you might have been expecting, and it's fantastic. It breaks my heart to not have it, but we'll get all into that in a moment. But first, we want to say here are the most popular episodes of Cinemaholics. Like, we're going to talk about the best films of the year.
Sure.
What about the most popular episodes of Cinemaholics? We don't know which ones are the most are the best episodes. We can't be objective about that.
Yeah, we got to get a little bit of navel gazing into our episode, so why not?
Yeah, let's do it. I always think this is fun. I'm
always interested by it. I don't mean to be dismissive. Yeah. I think this is interesting for me. Yeah.
It's less about like, here's how popular we are. To me, it's more interesting of like, here are the movies that like our listeners were most interested in.
Right.
I guess that they were not just downloading, but sharing and stuff. That to me is what's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I see the traffic. I see stuff that gets shared. And that's really what drives a lot of our download counts. So we'll start with the number 5. That's Bo Burnham Inside, which, we just mentioned that. And yeah, I think that it was a very popular episode. I think Bo Burnham Inside in general has been really popular with people. I've seen it everywhere. I've seen it memeified. I hear the music everywhere. I think it actually, of almost everything I think we're talking about today, had the biggest cultural impact in terms of movies. Definitely, if you don't count like a couple of superhero movies that came out, I think this was like probably the most like, I don't want to say essential movie of 2021, but certainly one of the ones that's really going to last a test of time, I think. But I know it wasn't your favorite, so don't have to harp on that. It's not in my top 10, so
yeah, I don't know if it's going to last a test of time, but it'll be an interesting time capsule to be sure. But I
think we can at least agree there.
You're right.
Our next one here, our 4th most popular episode, very weird. And I've seen this movie just like tick up, and I'm just like, what is it about this movie? I did not realize that people cared about this movie as much as they did, and that is Vivo.
Yeah, I was just gonna say people march to the beat of their own drum.
Yeah, they did. Vivo on Netflix. That's the animated Lin-Manuel Miranda whole thing, where it's like a Kickajou or whatever. And
sure,
I didn't love the music in it. I think that was like when I really hit peak Lin-Manuel Miranda fatigue, and then Encanto kind of won me back because I actually thought that was a really good effort. But yeah, this was one of those animated movies that I'm like, this does not to me represent how good animated movies were this year, but it's not bad or anything. In fact, I think I told you when I was at Disneyland in November, I literally saw somebody watching a Vivo on their phone while waiting in line, and I'm just like, you know what? That's what the kids want.
Sure. I just find that interesting because I haven't listened back to that conversation, but I don't remember us being particularly strong on the film one way or the other, as I'm wild to say. So I don't quite know why that conversation took off.
It comes down to people were like, who's reviewing this movie?
Sure.
Anybody?
Right.
And we were like the lone voices in the wilderness, Yeah. We'll do it. We'll talk about you.
Well, I hope, I'm glad people got something out of that conversation. Certainly. Yeah.
I think we could maybe similarly look at that for our number 3, which is Tom and Jerry, a spring live action animated hybrid movie that came out on HBO Max. And I think it's the same kind of thing. Like, I just don't think a lot of podcasts were talking about Tom and Jerry, but it was a box office hit. Maybe, it was one of those early, the vaccine wasn't out yet, but I think people were kind of getting more comfortable with going back to theaters already. And I think they wanted to see some Tom and Jerry. They couldn't resist.
Yeah. Not a film I thought about a lot or really remembered came out this year, but my eyebrows were definitely raised when I heard that was our number 3 most popular episode, to be sure.
All right. Well, then it's all come down to this. Our number 2 and our number 1. Our number 2 is To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Always and Forever. Another Netflix movie. I think I'm sensing here, because there were a lot of other Netflix movies like high up in terms of our popular episodes. Like Don't Look Up, I think is like killing it. What do you make of that? Is it because Netflix is so accessible? Tom and Jerry was accessible, right, through HBO Max. Do you think that has a lot to do with it?
Yeah. I would like to think that it was our spirited conversation. I remember having fun talking about that film with you, but I think it's for similar reasons that you have mentioned already, which is this, that movie has a built-in audience. People were, very enthusiastic and had strong feelings about that film. And I don't think a lot of people went out of their way to review it because it was the 3rd installment in a YA franchise that people, I think, were kind of getting tired of by installment number 2 for various reasons. So
sure.
I think seeing, 2 adult grown men hash it out about this teen romance was something that a lot of people found comfort in. And if that's the case, I'm really happy to hear it.
They sure did. Yeah, that reminds me of how the Billie Eilish documentary was also pretty high up in our most popular episodes. And it makes me think, if we had done Kissing Booth 3, I bet that would have been an all-timer in terms of downloads. Who knows? But
sure. Never saw those films, but,
Sure.
Would I have seen them for this film or for this podcast? Probably. So far, the 4 films we've talked about have all been streaming films. Almost all of them have been Netflix. One of them was HBO Max. Because I didn't even mention Bo Burnham Inside was Netflix, right? But our number 1, our most popular episode of the year, this is not a streaming exclusive. I think it's only available video on demand. It was in theaters over the summer, and that is M. Night Shyamalan's Old. Will, what in the world? And Old isn't just our most popular episode. It's our most popular episode by 1.5 miles. That was an episode where it was me and just Kimber Myers. Right.
So my thinking here is that people clicked in the episode and were like, whoa, an episode that Will's not on?
Sure.
I got to tell everybody.
Yeah. Ring the bell. No, you're good. I'd like to think it's because Kimber finally came back on the show and people were so enthusiastic to see her return that they had to let everyone know. That film was, I didn't get a chance to talk about with you, as you mentioned. And I wish I did, because I had differing thoughts to you.
Yeah, you're much more positive, right, compared to the two of us.
I have my problems with the film, but I think that movie is better than you two give it credit. And I definitely liked it more than, say, Cruella or Bo Burnham's Inside. I found it more emotional, I guess. And I certainly can understand some of the criticisms, and I don't understand others. But it's a film that it stuck with me. I actually debated putting it on my honorable mentions, and I didn't because I don't think I liked it that much. But I did like it considerably more than I think you and Kimber did. But
interesting.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to make your honorable mentions pretty easily, but I was wrong about that.
No, I mean, there's some movies like Champion, even despite you having your grievances. For instance, Best Summer Ever is not in my honorable mentions, but it's a film I will continue to champion. Despite the
movie that you gave me so much grief for not loving, and
it's a good film.
Like,
in my opinion, I think it's a very
doesn't even
sweet.
Make your honorable mentions.
It's a very sweet and personal film, and I think it's one that's worth champion. But I don't think it's quite up there with the top 30 of the year, unfortunately. But it's a musical that I think is worth seeing anyhow, and I think it's better than you give it credit. So
fair enough. So we're not doing the Rotten Tomatoes game this week for obvious reasons. What will we do it on? Yeah, but I do want to play the highest grossing films game with you. What do you think is the most highest grossing film of 2021? This is easy.
Well, it's probably Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, by a mile and a half. I mean, it's the only film that grossed over $1 billion this year. The only American film that even came close. I mean, it's at 1.5 billion right now and counting. There are a few other films, a few Chinese films that made plenty of money, like close to $1 billion, but not quite. But what do you think? This is the hard one, though. What do you think is the second highest grossing film worldwide in 2021?
Worldwide or domestic?
Worldwide. The American film, just to be American, like English language. I don't want to like put it in a box,
I think worldwide it's F9, but I think domestically it's Shang-Chi. Is that right?
No, Shang-Chi is number 9 right now worldwide. I don't know about domestically. I'll look at that too. But
domestic, yeah. I think for my answer for your initial question was F9. I think that's the second highest.
I'll look at the domestic too in a second.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's not F9. F9 is the third.
Oh, okay.
The second one is No Time to Die.
Oh, okay. That actually makes sense. Yeah.
And then there's Venom, Let There Be Carnage, which really climbed, and then Godzilla vs. Kong, which Godzilla vs. Kong was up there for a long, long time, and then Shang-Chi, and then Eternals. Now, if I look at I'll look up the 2021 domestic right now. 21 domestic box office. I haven't seen it in a little bit, but yeah, obviously Spider-Man is number 1. And hey, look, you were right that Shang-Chi is number 2 domestically. Good job.
That's what I thought. Yeah. That's what I thought. Is it number 3 Venom? Yeah.
Yeah, Venom's number 3. Then Black Widow. That's surprising. I thought F9 would be above Black Widow, but oh well. Eternals, No Time to Die. And then we have a few that weren't in the list before, and that's A Quiet Place Part 2. That's not too surprising. Ghostbusters Afterlife. I actually didn't know it did that well.
Yeah.
And then Free Guy. So a lot of these movies we're not going to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't think we're talking about any of these movies, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think any of those came close to topping my end of the year list. I guess the closest would maybe be No Time to Die.
Closest that would get to my honorable mentions is Spider-Man No Way Home, for sure. Okay. But okay, that is that's like a bit of a box office recap. Let's get into what you came for. The top 10 films of the year according to me and Will. And Will, we'll start with you.
Wait, are we doing
what? Did I forget something?
The things we didn't see, kind of doing a roundup of
Oh yeah, I did forget about that. Yeah. Okay. So Will, what are the movies that you couldn't get to?
So I mean, I always like to point this out because I worry that somebody's going to be like, hey, how come this one wasn't on your list? And it's because I didn't see it or I didn't like it as much as you. But in this case, I did not see Drive My Car. Unfortunately, I didn't see Parallel Mothers yet. I haven't seen Bad Luck Bang or Looney Porn. I haven't seen Memoria. I haven't seen Days. I haven't seen Azor or What We Do When We Look at the Sky or This Is Not a Barrel, It's a Resurrection. Or Emma, or The Rescue, or Old Henry, or Wife of a Spy, or The Pink Cloud, or France, or Procession, or Prayers for the Stolen, or Pebbles, or I didn't finish one that I actually liked a good bit, but I can't count it because I didn't get to the end of it. It's There Is No Evil, which is an Iranian anthology film. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but all those did not get into my timeline. So unfortunately, they're not eligible for me, at least. Yeah. How about you?
A lot of those I haven't seen either. And one of those in particular that I really want to see at some point is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. I really want to see that, and a few others that you mentioned, like Emma and the Rescue, and they look very good. There was one movie that came out last year that I still haven't seen, The Climb, which continues to be a climb for me to see it.
I hope you get a chance to see
frustrating.
That. Yeah,
me too.
I like that one a good bit. Yeah.
And I also haven't seen City Hall yet. Sorry to tell you. And speaking of. But yeah, really I'll just mention 3 because there's a bunch, but I just wanted to fixate on 3 of them because I know that I'm going to be seeing them as soon as I can. The Hand of God, which I started but haven't finished. Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, which I know. Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy I'm hoping to watch this week.
Yeah.
And A Hero, the Amazon film. So
I've seen that one as well. Yeah. So I have thoughts on all those, but maybe we'll discuss those later.
Yeah. Well, hey, I don't know. They make your list. Who's to say? Okay, so our top 10s of the year, and well, what's your best guess for how many films you saw in 2021? I'm at 257, so I figure you're not far from that, either below or you could be below, you could be like above. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so the way I do it, I just kind of tally all my first watches together. I don't do the I don't individualize it as far as the new releases, but last year was a new benchmark for me. I'd seen, let me look at the number exactly. It was 380 first watches for me. And I've seen already 12 films from this year, or this past year, I mean, catching up for this episode right here.
Well done.
And I saw several at TIFF that were also now 2021 film. So I don't know. It's probably somewhere in the ballpark of like 200 something movies. I wish I had more exact number, but I don't have one on the top of my head. But yeah, I know you have it all knocked down to a science, so I won't take the
yeah.
There you go.
Over the course of the year, I look through everything that I do, and all that stuff. Like I keep a running ranking over the course of the year, and it takes a lot of time. I'm actually bringing up my 2021 first entries here, or like first watches, or I'm trying to bring that up now. I don't see it as readily. Where do you find that?
Find what?
Where do you find how many films that you like?
I make a list. On Letterboxd.
On Letterboxd.
Anyone that wants to follow me will see it.
Okay, I see.
I always make a list.
I can't see how many first watches I have this year. I imagine it's around 300 or so, probably. Sure. It'd have to be over because I rewatch a lot of things. That's the thing, though. I don't log everything that I rewatch on Letterboxd. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So I imagine I watched anywhere from 50 to 100 films for the first time,
not counting
like classic films and stuff like that.
Yeah, but not counting the new films,
the rewatches,
and the rewatches as well.
I'd have to look into it, but anyway, that is enough of that. We got to get this thing going. Let's talk about our favorite films of the year.
Sure.
Starting with our number 10s. Will, what is your number 10 movie of 2021?
Starting with me. All right. So my number 10 film is one that I guess wouldn't be too surprising, but it's one that's probably going to be divisive for you, at least. It is a little French film called Titan.
Oh, boy.
Am I pronouncing that right, or is it Titan?
I think it's Titan. I think you said it right.
Yeah, okay. So that is the sophomore film and the Palme d'Or winning film from, let me see if I can pronounce her name right, Julia Ducournau.
I think it's Ducournau.
Ducournau, okay. Yep.
I don't say that confidently.
Right. I apologize. There are several names on this list that I know I'm going to butcher it. I have a bad habit of it, and it isn't me trying to be lazy or arrogant. I just am very bad at name pronunciations. But anyway, so as anyone that listened to our 2017 episode would know, Raw was like one of those movies that just felt like a revelation to me. It was such a fresh, vivid film in terms of how it tackled its central metaphor that I just knew I had to look out for this filmmaker and see what she did next. And I certainly had very high expectations for this sophomore film. And while it didn't quite reach, I think, the same heights as that previous film, it's another film that I just find to be incredibly accomplished and also oddly quite moving. I feel like people, when they saw Raw, they were quick to kind of dismiss it as being a little bit more interested in being grotesque without really diving into some of the more humane elements of those characters. And I think that was something that was also unfairly said about this film here, Titan. But for me, I think what it often reveals in these kind of perversions is often kind of more reflective and even sort of majestic in some odd sort of ways. And I think that becomes apparent with the second half of this film, even though the first half is what I think is really kind of more conversation worthy, as far as like having some of these more kind of outlandish and provoking scenes. For me, what I find so enriching about the film is how compassionate it becomes in the second half. I think that primarily comes from the lead performances from Agatha Razel and Vincent Linden. There's a chemistry there that is very hard to describe simply, but there's something kind of prickly but also very resounding about the way they kind of come together. And even when the grotesque body horror comes into the way, there's something I find really kind of oddly heart-wrenching about their dynamic together. There's something about this film and how it kind of carefully meditates on just the very nature of transformation and our sort of humane and oddly inhumane response to trauma that I find just very exhilarating and moving. And so I guess for me, when I think back on her films, I see as her being like thinking body horror not so much as being, I guess, provocative, but rather using these kind of grotesque subject matters to really say something deep and profound about the very nature of being alive, and how it's just kind of scary to have like these human bodies and be a human, but you can ultimately kind of make it through if you have people in your life connected, maybe indirectly or not, that make it worthwhile. And for me, I just really like how she approaches film, and I feel like this filmmaker is one that is really doing some, like I said before, revolutionary stuff with the art of film. And every time I watch her stuff, I just feel like I'm getting this jolt, I guess a very fitting way. And so I find Titan to be a sign of a filmmaker who's only continuing to grow and progress in very meaningful and moving ways. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I felt compelled to put this film at my number 10 spot on this list.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not as hot on the film as you are, but I think it's very respectable, and it's a movie that I certainly appreciate more than I don't, and I'm really glad that it came out this year, that it had that like effect on so many people, because you're clearly not alone. It's a film that I think a lot of people are responding pretty favorably to, so it's cool to see it here. But yeah, like with Raw, I guess Duke Arnaud's just not my director. Yeah, not somebody I think who speaks to me as directly, but that's fine. Doesn't matter. We have other movies that can do that. My number 10 film, super happy to include this one because, as I mentioned, I wasn't able to see Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, but that director, Ryusuke Hamaguchi, managed to come out with another film this year called Drive My Car. And Drive My Car, I'm really thrilled to see that it's getting some awards attention. It won a Golden Globe last night, and I think it's well deserved. This is a 3-hour Japanese film that really it's one of the few films that's really stuck with me this year, like in a very like uncomfortable way. It's a movie that I keep coming back to, keep thinking about. It's been a couple months since I saw it, and it's a movie about loss. It's a movie where, like, when you're watching it reminds me of the Korean film Burning, where it seems slow. It seems sort of like, okay, what are we getting to? We're kind of following this aging actor who, he's losing his eyesight, and, he's, casting and directing this play called Uncle Vanya. That's obviously an adaptation. But he's doing it in a very unique way. That's all I'll say about that. And you just sort of see him develop this friendship with his driver, this incredibly memorable and unforgettable car, this red, I forget what kind of car it is, but I mean, I would never forget the appearance. It's like instantly iconic. But it's like, I think the only movie that I've seen this year or like in general that I want the car, I want to drive the car. I'm just not as much of a car person as other people, but yeah, if you're looking for like really moving, heart-wrenching storytelling and performances across the board, this is such a surprising movie. This main character played by Tsuyoshi Goro he's just so lasting. He just really sticks with you. Also have to highlight Masaki Kawamura, who plays the supporting here. And yeah, like I said, it's a movie that I'm not going to forget about very easily. It's quite wonderful. So that is Drive My Car, my number 10.
Cool,
I know you wanted to see it.
Yeah, no, I unfortunately didn't get a chance to see it. I'll be talking about that filmmaker later on, not to spoil my honorable mentions. But
I think I already spoiled it just because I mentioned the other film you did. But yeah,
right. But yeah, I mean, I got very close. I mean, since you mentioned, I got very close to putting Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy in my top 10 at number 10 spot, which would have been fitting, given that you had his other film on that on your list. But at the same time, you know, we indirectly sort of mirrored each other by having 2 car films. So I guess it worked out. Yeah.
Good call. Yeah, that's true. All right. So then let's get into our number 9 films of 2021. So starting with you, Will, what is your number 9?
So my number 9 film is a documentary that I saw about a year ago, actually, on a virtual cinema. And it's one that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, but it's a film that I've been thinking about quite a lot, which is Some Kind of Heaven. I mean, not to get too political, but I feel like, especially in terms of cinema, it's kind of hard to process what really happened with the Trump administration. It's just such a chaotic time in our lives that it's really hard artistically, I think, to make sense of what really just happened there and really process it in meaningful ways. But as we'll discuss with, another film on my list, at least, the best art, I think, tends to evaluate not only the subjects directly, but rather like the people that were involved and how, broadly speaking, it affected, America. And I think in terms of this film, Some Kind of Heaven, the directorial debut from Lance Oberheim, what I find so impressive and ultimately so moving about it is that it uses this centerpiece, which is the Villages, which is, as the synopsis notes, a manicured facade based in Florida. It's a retirement community that has kind of like these well-to-do elders who are just basically living up their last years with every basically women indulgence that they want. It's kind of like the opposite of Never Never Land, in that like it's sort of like this tacky, glossy senior citizen residence where they can kind of shelter themselves from the outside world and create this almost like bleak utopia where they believe that they're fulfilling the American dream. I like to equate it as like if Errol Morris made a movie with Harmony Korine characters. That's like kind of like a halfway description of what this film is. But for me, what I find so interesting is that through this filmmaker, this first-time filmmaker, who's I think only like 24 when he made this film, which I find really impressive, he has such a observant way of noticing how empty it is, but how much this is so indirectly meaningful to these people. Like everything about the fakeness of this place is apparent. Like the grass is fake. The shopping plazas are just kind of like endless, and these people have like these fake plastered on smiles that you see throughout. But these banal pleasures, like they have such a meaning to these kind of bewildering but ultimately beguiling subjects that he focuses on. And I think for me, he finds this, even with their kind of over the top personalities, he finds their inherent humanity, what they're really trying to search for in this place that, from an outsider perspective, seems kind of garish and ugly and just sort of a kind of just dreary sort of place to live. But, for these people, like they see so much of the world in this place. They see it as a place to find love or like the wealth that they've been searching for, or wisdom or some sort of economic freedom or something like that. And it's a sort of beautiful and tragic way of looking at the world. And I think through this lens where it's very subjective and intimate, but also very observant and reflective, it paints this very interesting reflection on what I think America is and how basically someone like Trump could get into office because, it's kind of like believing in the lie almost and accepting what is clearly fake is ultimately real. And so for me, it became a really relevant film that I still think about a lot. I don't think it's a great documentary, but it's a really, really good one. And it's one that I've been trying to champion a lot and get people to watch. So that is Some Kind of Heaven. I believe it's available to stream right now on Hulu. It's definitely one worth seeking. I think it's only like 85 minutes too. So if you get a chance, definitely check that one out.
Yeah, that's Some Kind of Heaven. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because the movie I'm about to talk about is also one that came out Sundance 2020, but didn't get its release until this year. So fun. And that movie for me, my number 9, is The Killing of Two Lovers. And this is a movie that I really hold up. And when people talk to me about films I saw this year that I think were just helpful, not just to me, but to other people, I think of this one. For those of you who may not have caught, I think we talked about this film earlier in the year, but because it came out like in May, I want to say, and this is one of the Neon films I referred to. And this movie takes place in Montana. It's about a man who, he's a little bit older, or like I don't remember how old he was supposed to be, but I think like late 20s, early 30s. So like past sort of like adolescence, but he had children with his like high school sweetheart when they were very young, but she is in the process of separating with him and starting to date somebody else. And this movie is just such a blissful slow burn of a meditation on something that I don't think enough movies are courageous enough to bring attention to. And that is just like the fragility of men, and how like men in general are fed all of this pop culture of like what it means to be strong, what it means to be like emotionally, a man, and how to be like grown up and all these things. And this is a movie sort of tackling like what men really are, which is like we're very vulnerable, like we're sensitive, a lot of us. Even the hardest, tough-nailed, most stoic person, when you really put them through it, behind all of the aggression, there's like this layer of just men just feeling like alone. And it's such an issue, like I think in the world. And I think that it's something that men should help each other with because, we're fellow men. And that's why I love this movie. I think that this movie really gets to the heart of that message, brings it forward in a very entertaining and really artful way. It's insightful. It's provocative. It has an unbelievably good ending. And I just think it's one of those movies that you start off feeling a certain way when you see this character and what he's doing. And over the course of the movie, it deconstructs that expectation in a way that I just think is so profound. And as I can't help saying over and over again, helpful and productive. And what I think films of this era should do more often. You mentioned a film that, is kind of political in nature. It kind of helps us make sense of current events and what the world is like. And I think Killing of Two Lovers is a drama film that uses a really good, not even a metaphor, but an allegory really of how we can relate to each other, even the most extreme versions of ourselves, and maybe, the path to healing, getting a little bit better and dealing with these sorts of things for the sake of everybody, men and women. So fantastic film. It was directed by Robert Macklin, and I think this director has a really strong career ahead of him. I think it was his first film, or at least one of his first films. I don't recall if it was his debut, honestly. But I really got to highlight Clayton Crawford, who plays the main actor here, is just tremendous. So big fan of Killing Two Lovers, and I think you saw it, Will, because I think we talked about it, right?
We reviewed it. Yeah. I like the film. Yeah, I didn't.
It was in Utah. Sorry, not Montana.
Yeah.
I got Power of the Dog on my
right. Yeah, I don't think it hit me quite as deep as it hit you. I haven't been thinking about it as much as you have, clearly, but it's definitely one I liked a lot, and I agree with you. This filmmaker is one that I'm really excited to see where they go next. Definitely, I mean, it's one of those films that, I don't know what the budget is, but I know the film looks way more accomplished than probably what the budget was. And, it's very sparse in how it comes together, but it has so many moments that just really hit and pack a punch. And definitely the lead performance helps with that a lot. So, yeah, it's a good film. I definitely would recommend it as well.
All right, let's get into our number 8. Will Ashton. Number 8, we haven't done any overlap yet. So far, we got outliers happening. And I'm curious, though, that might change eventually. What's your number 8?
There's going to be no overlap, I know, with this one. I can say that confidently because my number 8 film is Annette, which is a film that I remember you were not fond of. And I was, more favorable.
You're not alone. You're not alone.
Sure.
I'm seeing it on all kinds of top 10s. I'm seeing people give it number 1. In fact, I'll highlight Dan Murrell, who was on the show this year. I think twice this year. He had it as number 1 film of the year. So, Will, clearly you're onto something.
But yeah, I mean, with a film like this, there are certain films that we see throughout the year, and we have a very instantaneous reaction to them. It's just like, I really like that, or I didn't like that at all, or that was just a fine film, or whatever. But this one, while I liked it when I saw it, I think I needed some time to really process it and contextualize my feelings on it. I remember when we reviewed the film, I think I was less strong than I feel now. So I would understand if someone was confused listening to that episode and then seeing me put it number 8. But, this film, it's the follow-up to Holy Motors. Leo Carax did it like 10 years later. He doesn't make films quite as quickly as some of our other filmmakers on this list. But as expected, it was a fairly divisive film. I think it's a film that even divided us. It's a kind of confounding and puzzling film in terms of what it's trying to accomplish. But at the same time, for me, when I think back on the films that had the most meaning, that feel most in sync with what I want out of a cinematic experience, Annette feels so uniquely individualistic that I feel it's kind of hard not to champion, especially in a year that was basically over flooding with musicals like 2021. This film, it has a weird kind of tricky balance where it's so artistically grandiose, but it's also kind of taking the piss out of the very nature of being self-important as an artist. And this balance of having a very self-involved, over serious comedian, played by Adam Driver quite impactfully, forming this kind of unholy bond with this very radiant opera singer played by Marion Cotillard. There's this relationship that forms that's very mysterious and mystique and kind of over the top and ultimately tragic, and it mirrors the sort of operaticism of our characters, and as well as the sort of brass showmanship of this sort of noxious comedian. And I think that kind of mix of like sugar and vinegar, it makes a taste that's, I think, going to be very peculiar, and something that I can certainly understand people being like, I don't really like this at all. But I think, through Carax's sort of unapologetic style, and also making a very personal film, while also being championed by Driver's very distinctive screen presence, it's hard for me not to really be entranced by this whole thing. It's sort of like a concept art or concept album by way of like a Greek tragedy and a Shakespearean comedy. And, as it expands and unfolds, it's something that's, I just feel so distinctly different than what we're getting in a cinematic market right now that seems to be favoring sort of more commercial efforts. And, it's definitely not flawless. I think there's a lot you can say about the film critically that is warranted, but I think that boldness and bravado that it brings is something that I find hard to ignore. And I feel like it's something that I just have been thinking about and really mulling about throughout the year, because there's just not a lot of films like this one in this year or any other. And I just feel really thankful that we got a film like this, kind of balancing this sort of old-fashioned extravagance with sort of more contemporary provocations. It's a very distinct film, and I think that's also elevated by some fairly original music by Sparks, who also got their own documentary this year, courtesy of Edgar Wright. So it's a very I call it a dynamically mystifying film, and I just really appreciate what it is and what it was able to accomplish. And I will say, if So Maybe Start, the opening song of the film, does not get nominated for Best Original Song at the Oscars, I'm going to flip a table. So I'm really ultimately very favorable on the film, but as I've mentioned already, fairly apologetically so, because I can see why people don't like this film.
Yeah, I'm one of them for sure. I still do not like Annette as a movie. That's okay. I will not poke at a movie that you clearly had such a great reaction to. I'm happy to see it, because I do appreciate, like with Titan, I appreciate the art itself, even if it's one that doesn't resonate with me, for sure. So far, I'm liking this, though. I feel like our lists are very disparate from each other, but we are in sort of like a very artsy land right now with our movies. We'll see if that keeps going. But my next one certainly still have a piece with that, and that's Parallel Mothers. It made the list, Will, because I just watched this film yesterday. I'm happy to hear that.
I mean, I genuinely did not know where you landed on this film, because, like you said, you just saw it, and we haven't talked about it. So that's very exciting. I do imagine. Yeah.
Well, okay, you know me, and Pedro Almodovar is, clearly one of my favorite filmmakers working today.
You say that as if he's not one of my favorite filmmakers.
I'm just saying.
I know. I love Pedro Almodovar. I'm very excited to see this film.
Yeah, he's such a fantastic filmmaker, just so vibrant and honest and vivid in everything that he does. The last film from him that I saw was Pain and Glory, which I thought was also excellent and was kind of cheated in some award categories that year, but that's fine. But this one premiered at Venice, and it's just one of those movies where the premise is just so good. Like, in my Letterboxd review, I joked that it should have had its premise or like the title of the film should have been swapped with The Lost Daughter, which a decent movie. I like The Lost Daughter fine. It's
I would say good better movie. Than decent. Yeah, it's a good film. Yeah, good film.
Good film. Not in my honorable mentions, but it's close. Like, it's like not far. But Parallel Mothers stars Penelope Cruz and this other actress, Milena Smith, who I just think is mesmerizing in this. Just wonderful. Everybody in this is so good. And it's about these two women who both give birth to a baby at the same time. They're roommates in the hospital. And it's sort of about their budding friendship as they are mothers of like two different generations. One of them is about to be 40. The other is very young. She's, still a teenager. And it's sort of about, motherhood, of course, but more specifically, it's about like losing connection with your history and where our families come from and where they're buried. And it's just such a resonant film in that respect. It's one that is just so tight. Like, this script is, I think, almost perfectly edited. I don't think I would cut anything from it except maybe like a couple minutes here and there toward the end, but it just is paced so well. And once you get to the heart of what this movie really is about, and I will absolutely not give anything away because I've been very vague on purpose, as this movie's twists and turns keep unfolding, you're just like, what am I watching here? And I was absolutely gripped. I really thought that this thing was very, not just emotionally powerful, but just one of those movies that you watch, you just get so into it. You're just like, I cannot wait to see what happens next. This is so great to see. This is so energetic and full of life. And I just think that's so emblematic of all of Almodovar's films. I just think that he just has a way of making the world seem colorful and beautiful, but in a very honest way. Like, it's not Cinderella, it's not these movies that gloss everything and make a big, to do, and like everything's bright and glitter and happy and great. It's sort of like, hey, everything is bright and we can create this, wonderful, emotional, warm setting, but it's full of real, actual people. And that's absolutely what you get with Parallel Mothers. So yeah, it jumped to the top 10 for me as soon as I saw it without any question whatsoever. Really happy that it did,
Nice.
Because it's fantastic. I hope you're able to see it soon enough.
Yeah, I was, as you were talking, I was looking to make sure that, or I was trying to see rather that if it was playing near me this weekend, and unfortunately it doesn't look like it is. So I don't know when that's supposed to come out locally, if it is even coming out locally, but I really hope it does come out near me because I love me a good Almodovar film, and Pain and Glory was the first time I actually got to see one of his films in theaters. So I was hoping to continue that trend with Parallel Mothers, but we'll see. But I plan on checking it out as soon as possible, to be sure.
Sounds great. And it's playing here in the Bay Area. So if we have any listeners in the San Francisco area, it's playing at a few theaters out here. Hopefully that means it'll be coming to Pittsburgh soon enough. All right, it's time. Our number 7 films. We're at Lucky 7. Will Ashton, what is your number 7 film of the year?
Yeah, so my number 7 pick is a film that at one point was teetering for the number 1 spot, and it's a film I like it a lot, but I think some of the other films I've seen throughout the year have overshadowed it. But that's not to say anything negative about this film, but rather just how much I like those films. But in any case, my number 7 pick is Bergman Island. So as the title of the show might suggest, I like to pride myself in being something of a cinemaphile. But unfortunately, I'm not super familiar with Ingmar.
It's either cinephile or cinemaholic. Well, you got to pick one.
Oh yeah, I was trying to combine the two. Cinephile.
Right,
I'm just so used to saying Cinemaholics. I think because Cinemaholics is a word that people get tripped up on. So I feel like I had to make sure I pronounced it right. But in the process, I tripped up on cinephile. So you win some, you lose some, I guess. But in any case, even though I do pride myself on being a cinephile, I will admit that I don't have much familiarity with Ingmar Bergman's work. I mean, I know the films, but I haven't seen as many as I would like to. And I can't say there's a good reason why. But I would say, even though I'm still making my way through his filmography, I didn't have any problem appreciating what Mia Hansen-Løve does with her film Bergman Island, which is, I think, both a cinematic love letter to not only his films, but the art of cinema in general, and also just a very profoundly gratifying character study that explores just the very idea of storytelling and how our past and presence will always be intertwined with our work, even when that becomes ultimately the past. I think combining the performances from Vicky Krieps and Tim Roth and Maya Wachowski and Anders Danielsen Lai, who we'll be mentioning, or I'll be mentioning at least later on this list, I think there's something so tender and resoundingly explorative about this movie and how it explores the subjectivity of how we find love, and also how that kind of fuses into our general desire to find creative inspiration, even when it ultimately sort of reveals some insecurities that we have in the process. And I think the way it tangles these sort of messy feelings in a very clean and involving package is something that I think is quite envious, because it's so delicate, but it ultimately becomes so devastating at the same time. I think it's a film that's very seductive. It's very sensual, but it's also very enchanting and unabashedly sentimental in its approach. And I think it does all those things without feeling too self-satisfying or self-serving. And even though it has so many opportunities to feel fairly indulgent, and certainly in terms of like how it parallels the story and parallels Bergman, and certainly parallels Bergman in a sense of replicating some scenes from a Marriage, I feel like this movie is at its most complete when it has those influences, but it's balanced with the dexterity that Hansen Louvre has in forming this fairly fully realized story that's, as I mentioned, very gentle in its reflection, but also very acutely realized in terms of what it means to kind of fall in love and allowing yourself to fall in love with someone and allow that to involve you to make very meaningful and personal art. And just the very nature of art itself. I think it's a very rich film, and it's something that, even though I don't think it's quite as impactful enough to be in my top 5, it's something that I just find to be so swelling and so tender and just gratifying to watch from as a film fan, and just someone who just loves seeing films that just feel like someone just ripped their heart out and put it on the screen. And, you know, I would say the needle drop here for ABBA's The Winner Takes It All might be my favorite needle drop of the year, but it's kind of tough to say because there are actually quite a few needle drops that are really, really good and well used this year. So all that to say, I really like this film a lot. I can see why some people might want to dismiss it, but it's one that really stuck with me, and I just have a lot of soft, warm, bubbly feelings for it. So that is Bergman Island, my number 7 pick.
All right, that's the first of your picks that I think I really am like vibing with, mainly because I haven't seen Some Kind of Heaven. I don't know if I would like that as much, but yeah, I just watched Bergman Island, or finished it the other day, and yeah, I have to agree with you. This movie's tremendous. It's not in my top 10, but it's absolutely close to it. I think Bergman Island's just wonderful. That needle drop you mentioned, I think that entire scene, that whole sequence, is one of my favorite scenes of the whole year. It made the movie for me. Like,
yeah,
up until that point,
for me, yeah,
I definitely was sort of like, I like this. Do I love it? And then that scene happens. I'm like, yes, this is great. Like, this is what I came for. And yeah, everything you mentioned and more, total agreement. I love what this is saying about storytelling. It's really, really good stuff. And I love seeing Vicky Krieps in a good movie. I know that you also liked Old, but I was kind of like, you know, not as high.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I liked Old, I think this is her performance of the year. I'll say that.
Sure. And I have to say, as somebody who, you know, I'd say Ingmar Bergman is one of my blind spots, you know, one of the great directors. I have not seen enough of his films. And this was a wonderful, you know, stroke of inspiration of like getting into some of his work and finally correcting that would be great to round me out as a film watcher. So hopefully Absolutely. I can do that in response.
Yeah, I bring that up because when I talk about this film with people, they're like, oh, I'm actually not that super well versed with Bergman. I'm like, I have to be like, I'm not either, but I still really like this movie. And I don't think that's a crutch. Like, I don't think that's going to prevent anyone from enjoying this film. So I just put that caveat only in the sense that I don't think you need to be a Bergman expert to like love this film or anything like that.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I'll say my number 7 film then. And this one, you know, it's tough because for most of the year, I was like, I think this is my favorite animated film of the year. I think there's one other film that gets above it, but I think for reasons I'll have to get to when I talk about that movie. But for now, I'll say number 7 for me is Luca, the Pixar summer film. I think for me, the best film of the whole summer, except for one other. Actually, no, that's not true. 2 other films that technically came out in the summer, but at least in the more traditional sense, when I think of like summer movies, like those other 2 films I'll talk about, they technically came out in the summer, but they aren't like summer movies to me. They could have come out anytime. This movie I had to have watched, you know, like in the middle of summer when it was hot outside, and I got transported to Italy in this wonderful animated film that I wish I could have seen it in theaters, but I couldn't. I could talk to you for hours about Pixar and theaters and all of that drama, but we'll have to set that aside for now. I mean, this movie's incredible. It's just what Enrico Casarosa was able to do, taking like a childhood memory and adding like a Miyazaki twist and like calling out Miyazaki and bringing us to this place and like merging this sort of like fable of like sea monsters coming on dry land and looking like humans, and kind of in this like really impressive like Federico Fellini sort of environment that's not just whimsical, but you know, it's alive. Like you watch this movie and it's like you feel like you're there. It's one of the few films, especially animated, where I felt just absolutely transported. I think that if there's something that 2021 was not amazing at, by and large, it was escapism. Like, I look at my favorite films of the year, and I didn't really escape in these movies for the most part. A few here and there, but not at least in a fantastical way. If I did escape, it was in a more grounded, sort of like dreamlike way, but very much in this kind of world. But Luca, I think, was one of the few that, like, it wasn't like a homework movie. Not that any of these are homework movies, but sometimes they can come across like they are. They can be a little bit, more to chew on. Luca was just like a pure entertainment, but with just like just a beauty to it that I could not deny, that I couldn't get enough of. I've seen it many times at this point. It's a comfort food kind of watch for me right now, and certainly one of the better Pixar films of recent years. I'd say I'd probably put this one above Soul. I'd put this one above Onward. It really is rewarding. The more I watch it, the more I just get so much out of the music, the artistry. This doesn't look like a lot of other Pixar movies, which I really appreciate. It's really breaking away from some of those formulas. Also, I really commend the script. I think the script is really good. It's not too long. It's not too short. It's just like, it gets you right into this world and out in a very rich, fascinating, pace. Like, I really thought this one worked across the board. So yeah, Luca, one of my favorites of the year for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I was really close to putting this in my honorable mentions. It didn't quite make the cut, but I can certainly see why you felt very strongly about it. I really appreciate it. And like you said, I mean, it's the type of film that it's easy to kind of get basked into it. And then even when you think back on it, just like, man, that movie didn't get its due. I feel like people kind of dismissed it just because it didn't really get the theatrical release and stuff. But it's a good film. I definitely think people should check it out for sure.
I think people also dismissed it because they were just like, it's too simple. And I actually think it was also really good, coming out allegory that you could read into
absolutely.
it.
But,
yeah. That I think some people just didn't, I don't know if they believed that was the case, or I don't know. I don't want to relitigate, but
people made jokes about it, but I mean, I think, that's kind of cheap.
Well, a lot of the jokes were just like, it's Call Me By Your Name. And it's like, it's very different.
Right.
Yeah. But okay. Our number 6 films. We're almost halfway through, but Will, your number 6 film of the year. We're getting close to the midway point.
I mean, this one, I would have been shocked if this one didn't make the list, and I think you're gonna know what it is pretty quick. It's a film that it stars someone who has been a favorite of mine for quite a while, and someone who has been involved with several films that have been on my top 10 list in other years. That film is Pig, and that star is Nicolas Cage.
Will, that's my number 6.
Is it also your number 6?
It's also my number 6.
Oh, wow. All right. Have you ever really core lined with this?
I don't think so. If we have, it was a while ago. And I got to say, Pig, the number 1 film over at theyoungfolks.com. Yeah. It was by far.
So how do you want to do this? Do you just want to kind of go back and forth, or how we do this?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. You like Pig? Well, what do you like so much about it?
Well, I mean, so as I mentioned, I think the public assessment of Nicolas Cage has kind of gone back and forth a lot. I think people, they see the memeage of him, or like just the easy sources of derision, because he can be very kind of theatrical and over the top, and a lot of films that don't really service his talents or his enthusiasm for the craft that well. And I can understand why people are quick to dismiss him, but for me, there's always something very compelling about him. I don't think he really fully ever half-asses a film, even when it sometimes looks like he does. I think he's always trying to bring something unique and thoughtful to his performances. And I think it's just a matter of whether or not a filmmaker can really bring the best out of film that determines whether he gives a great performance or a mediocre one. And when it comes to Michael Ceranosky's debut here, I think it results in what I think is probably one of Nick Cage's very best performances.
It's Michael Sarnosky.
Oh, Sarnosky. I apologize. But I mean, I think it's a very soulful and almost kind of confoundingly beautiful film, because I think when people see the trailer or they see the synopsis for the film, they sort of think like it's Nick Cage's version of John Wick. And I guess in a broad sense, it sort of is, but it's not like an action thriller. It's not like a a vengeance film in the traditional sense. Like he's not, like pumping people full of lead and going around town, beating people up. If anything, people beat him up, but I don't want to give away too much about the film. It's a film that I think it proves to be, at least for me, a far more sort of subdued, yearning, and intellectually stimulating film than I guess I initially thought. And, you know, it has a very, as we mentioned, sort of simple premise where it follows this sort of socially distanced truffle hunter who goes on a quest to reclaim his stolen swine. But
I like the way you put that.
Yeah, but I think what I find so meaningful about the film, especially as a Nick Cage fan, is how it ultimately sort of mirrors the career and the public life of Nicolas Cage. Because so many people are going to be like, why does Nicolas Cage go so out for this? Why is he like, you know, dress up like the devil to play Ghost Rider and Ghost Rider 2 or whatever? Like, why does he do all these sort of outlandish things for his art? Like, what is it so important to do this for this? And I feel like the film itself is not only commenting on Nicolas Cage's career, which has certainly been filled with its fair shares of ups and downs, but just searching for what it means to be an artist and how there's this sort of thirsty desire to really just like make a meal out of everything. In this case, quite literally, obviously, because the art of choice is the culinary arts. But as far as like Nicolas Cage's performance in this film, it's I guess a little bit more reserved, a little bit more subdued, as I mentioned, than some of his other works. But it has that intensity that I think is so impossible to ignore with Nicolas Cage. Like you just see in his eyes this sort of looming intensity, but at the same time, it's used this sort of grieving, melancholic way that it has, like I said before, this sort of lovely, impactful vibe where it's obviously very gorgeously shot and very rich in how it makes so much out of its very sort of simplistic premise. But the beauty of the film, I think, ultimately comes from the minuteness of it and how it really searches for like these very little things in life that feel so seemingly meaningless to some other people, but are ultimately so precious to some, like in this case, Nicolas Cage's character. And even if no one else really understands it, or rather even wants to understand it, it means something to somebody. And if it's lost, there is something that is really hard to get over and reconcile with that. And so I really like Pig as just that celebration, as I said, of the artistic pursuit. And even more than that, I really like it as a testament to Nicolas Cage's long-standing, decades-long pursuit to making the most out of his craft and finding this lyricism, even in the sort of like kind of generic banal films, which is certainly not the case for this film. It's a very, like I said, bold and lovely film. And, I think it's a type of film where the ripple effects of it doesn't really seep in until you think about it for a long time. And I think this is really going to withstand the time as one of Nicolas Cage's most meaningful films. And I really, really like it a lot. So I'll let you say your piece about the film now.
Well, you went pretty long, so I don't think I can say much else, but I mean, you captured a lot of it. I think if there's one thing I want to harp on here, it's that, I mean, what this movie does so well, and I think that is just so subversive to me, is like, I think it advances its genre, or it advances, I think, what movies can be about. It does so much work, and impressively, considering it's Sarnowski's debut as a filmmaker, I just think it does so much to sort of say, like, we can have films that feature, that sort of like turn the revenge trope on its head. This is the same year we got movies like Nobody, with Bob Odenkirk, which, those are fun movies, and I don't want to like bring those down or anything.
Yeah,
but
I had fun with Nobody.
Yeah. But what I like about movies like this is that they're just so promising. You watch a movie like this and you're like, we can get different kinds of things. Like, we can get a variety where we can actually like subvert that trope, like kind of deconstruct. Why is it that revenge films are so satisfying to us? This is such a self-aware movie in that respect, where it knows what we're expecting it to be. And then it turns all of that around on us, and it investigates the watcher. Right? It's a two-way conversation. I think this movie is dabbling in, because it's clearly like a dialogue between, not just Nicolas Cage, but also Alex Wolff and also Adam Arkin to an extent. And I have to just highlight, I think that scene in the restaurant, I didn't see it coming. Right? I'm watching this scene and like, if I had to pick a scene of the year, this could be the one. Like it's up there. Right. And it's just, it's moving, it's lasting. It's just a true gem of a film. And I think you're right. I think it will go down as one of his more meaningful films, right? I think that it should be in that respect. So I'm all in for Pig. Some Pig.
Yeah, it's like not to get hyperbolic, but it kind of feels like you're going into like the McDonald's drive-through, just getting a Big Mac. It's just like, oh, I just need something to tide me over, and you suddenly get like a 4-course meal. And you're like, wait, I'm sorry, is there a steak? And then your dad comes out, he's just like, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. And it's like, what is happening? I just thought I was going to get a Nicolas Cage movie.
This is the best McDonald's ever,
right? I feel like that's like the experience of watching this film. You expect something kind of tacky and simple, but it becomes a very unexpectedly rich and poignant film. And I really hope more people check it out. It's quite a good film.
Same here. And another Neon film. So there you go there. And like I said, Neon and A24 had great years. All right. So since I didn't have too much to say, then I can start with this next one. Kind of get you off the hook a little bit. But my number, we're at number 5. Number 5 already. And I'm excited to talk about this one because it's another award season movie, one that I saw a little bit later at the end of December, but I'm so glad that I did. So I was able to include it here because I think it's fantastic. And that is The Worst Person in the World. This is the new film from Joachim Trier. And it's hard for me even to describe this movie in a way that I am happy with, because the more I try to describe it, the more I'm just like, well, yeah, okay, but that doesn't do it justice. I'll do my best though. So this is a Norwegian film, and it's kind of like a dark romantic comedy, but it's also kind of like more like a dark romantic dramedy actually. And I think that it's one of those movies where you're watching it and it does take some time for it to fully settle into what it is. Because you start and, it starts with narration. It starts with this sort of young woman who's clearly going through a lot of change. And we watch her sort of go through a series of different relationships, and we see how they change her and how they shape her. Like that sounds kind of basic, right? But this movie is all about the how, not the what. Like you're watching how she responds to certain things. You're watching her range of emotion and expression in any given situation. I think that she's not going to. So this actress, I have to say, she's not going to win Best Picture. I doubt she'll be nominated, unfortunately. But Renate Reinsve,
you mean,
I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
You mean Best Actress?
Yes, Best Actress. Excuse me.
It would be quite an achievement if she won Best Picture. But I mean, I think it's well deserved, to be honest. I mean,
she has great pictures in this. But no, her winning Best Actress, I think I would give it to her in a landslide. Right? Because I just think that I think it's one of the best performances, male or female, because what she's doing here, she's taking a character, and this is another subversive film. I think if there is a theme between all the films on my list, it's subversion. It's sort of taking things we already know in movies and just turning them around and making something unique out of them. And in this case, you're taking the kind of like female character that I think a lot of people would be like, that character is unlikable. This character is doing things that I think are despicable, or I wouldn't do things that way, or like, I don't like it when women do this or whatever. Like it can come off as like anti-woman or something like that, some of the criticism. And this movie is just sort of like, here is a person, here's a human being, and kind of similar, I guess, like what I was talking about with, like Pig and Killing of Two Lovers are two films that I think are talking a lot about like the male ego, the male sort of like the masculinity, the expectations that are put on men that men put on themselves. And this movie, I think, is about like a woman sort of like radiating herself out to other people and just like gravitating toward the ones who respond to her in a way that is authentic and accepting. And it doesn't gloss over her flaws. It doesn't treat her like any sort of like hyper competent, has all the right answers. It's not pandering. I know you didn't see the 355, but that is a movie that I think just does not understand what is empowering about, feeling like not just comfortable in your gender or the gender that you certainly identify with, but like really just having such a being synced with like your place in the world and what that means in every respect. And so I think that it's a movie that just, it's so good. It's long, and I love how it's broken though by chapters, because I certainly was able to like get through it feeling like I was reading a really great book, but in movie format. Just happened to be a movie, and I consider that a pretty great thing. There are fantastic scenes in this. I've already talked about a certain scene in this that is just again another highlight of the year for me, like where the time kind of slows down. But there's another whole sequence involving like two people who kind of just flirt for an entire night that just like sticks in my brain, like the chemistry, but but also the tension, also the sort of like, will they, won't they, could they, should they, like all that stuff, I think is just so well done, so brilliantly directed and written. Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. I know it premiered at Cannes, and it's, I think it was available in New York and LA, but it's not playing everywhere yet. But yeah, as soon as it hits like limited release, I think people should hopefully seek it out.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but it is going to be on my list a little bit higher, so I will reserve some of my thoughts on the film until that point. But I certainly have a lot of fond, affectionate feelings for the film, as I've mentioned in the past, and I'm very excited to hear that you had similarly fond feelings for the film as well.
Wonderful to hear. I'm glad it's not also your number 5. That would have been weird if we had the same 5 and 6.
You say that, but it got pretty, like, my 4 through 6 picks are pretty interchangeable. Like,
Interesting.
Kind of went back and forth on like what should go where. So there is a timeline where we had the same 5 and the same 6, but that didn't quite happen this time.
All right. Well, let's stick to this timeline then, I guess. What's your number 5 of the year, Will?
My number 5 pick is a film that I wasn't sure if it would be on your list, but I know you like it a lot as well, so this one isn't going to be divisive. It is Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch. So as I think I've vocalized throughout this episode and other episodes of Cinemaholics, I feel like we're kind of in something of a drought period cinematically. It's becoming apparent now that the interest of filmmakers is being shooed away in the interest of doing IP and sort of things that I feel like are more in the interest of appealing shareholders than looking out for the interests of the filmmakers. And, you know, that's not to say that great work doesn't come out of that, but I feel like it's becoming more and more rare that we see a film from a bona fide filmmaker, someone who has such a distinct style, someone who has such distinct cinematic presence in a way that is pretty unmistakably their own. And I think that's certainly the case for Wes Anderson, as he's proven throughout, I think, 9 or 10 films at this point. I forget exactly what number this is for The French Dispatch, but I will say when the film came out, and maybe this had to do with the delayed release, or maybe this had to do with people having kind of concrete opinions, I guess, at this point about how they feel about Wes Anderson as a filmmaker. But I feel like people were kind of dismissing this one rather unfairly as a sort of lesser effort, or maybe a more slight effort from Wes Anderson. But I just didn't really
Can I cut in? The criticism that bugs me the most, and it's not something that I even disagree with that much, is like people are just kind of saying it in a condescending way. It's the most Wes Anderson movie. Right. It's like, okay, I get why you're saying that, but I do think that it just comes off as dismissive to me. It comes off like condescending in a weird way. But I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because I just feel like, you know, like I see people are like, oh, he's doing his twee thing again, or like, oh, you know, like he's like, you know, like playing it up to a certain style. It's so unoriginal at this point. And for one, it's just like, well, what did you expect? He's Wes Anderson. Like, why'd you watch the movie if you didn't like this? I mean, I'm sorry. Like, what do you expect? And the other thing is just like, well, why are we dismissing this? Because for me, I just found this film to be just so delightful. Like, it's a type of film that I just, throughout the whole thing, I just had this big smile on my face. It was obviously covered by a mask, but I was just, you know, delighted throughout this whole thing, because it seems like Anderson at this point is becoming even more in tune with his cinematic language, his sense of style, and just his sense of self as a filmmaker at this point. And obviously, you know, like this hyper stylized style, as we mentioned, is getting very criticized by certain people for being, you know, either slight or twee, or that he's somewhat, I guess, losing the humanity that was so core to his earlier films like Rushmore and the Royal Tenenbaums. But while I can understand on the surface why people feel that way, I feel like this anthology story does have a lot of that humanity. It's kind of tuckered in unsuspecting ways. You know, obviously the story of it follows this sort of like dying New Yorker-esque magazine that's putting out its last issue. And we're seeing in these vignettes all these different stories being told in a very cinematic way throughout somewhat scattered narrative. And it can kind of feel like sort of similar to the Coen Brothers' Ballad of Buster Scruggs. It kind of feels a little bit like a grab bag of all the different ticks and mechanics that we get from Wes Anderson films. But I think at the core of this film is, like I said, like a love letter just to the creative spirit, sort of similar to Bergman Island in that respect, as well as the folks who just foster and harvest that individualistic freedom, even sometimes in the case of this film against corporate interest. And so you just see a film like this that so openly celebrates just the foundations of having creative endurance. It's not an especially novel film, but it just feels so assuring, especially with someone like Wes Anderson, who's becoming more confident, I think, as a filmmaker as he goes along. But even like on the surface level, I think it's easy to appreciate this film as a delightful little like ode to writers, and like the people that we love to read and the editors who just let them do their thing, or restrain them in, I guess, loving but critical ways. I think that's something, obviously, as writers and editors ourselves, that's easy to appreciate. But I think what I find so impactful about the film, especially as I mentioned in this sort of increasingly dire time for movies, is just how well it's able to be assuring and devastating about just what it means to create art and be a writer or an artist, like I said, in sincere and moving ways. And it's a film that I can understand why people are criticizing as being slight or derivative for Wes Anderson, but I think the more you unpack this film, the more you realize it carries that sort of melancholy charm that is really thoughtful and sincere in all of Wes Anderson's films, and I don't think this film is any exception at all. So I'm pretty happy to put this one at number 5. I think it's a really outstanding film, and yet another triumph from Wes Anderson.
We're agreeing a lot lately, which is suspicious. It makes me think that we're gearing up for a big old conflict because, oh my gosh, I agree with so much of that. I think that, French Dispatch, it's not in my top 10, but it's so close. Like it's literally a movie or two away. And for all the reasons you mentioned and more, I think like picking things out of this movie for sure. I think the entire sequence of Benicio del Toro and Léa Seydoux is just it's just like a beautiful short film on its own.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's just, we're just spoiled to have so many other things wrapped around with it. I
Sure.
appreciate it. So I like Frances McDormand's whole section in this with Timothée Chalamet.
Mm-hmm.
Great needle drops in general, really good climax. Sure. Everything in here is just so like you said, it's just like I felt gratified at the movie theater. I felt like I was experiencing something really worthwhile. And I can't say that I get that a lot with movies like this these days, and that's why I'm kind of like I said before, it's like calling this the most Wes Anderson film. You can say that about every Wes Anderson film since like Life Aquatic or Royal Tenenbaums.
Sure.
You can he goes all out with all of his movies, and I think that's something to be applauded. And I still think that they're all so unique,
right?
Even though they have some of these same signature styles, you can't say that this movie is the same thing as like Moonrise Kingdom or Grand Budapest Hotel.
Right.
It's just, it absolutely, like you said, it's its own beautiful little anthology, wrapped up in a perfect little string for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would push back is just say that as much as I like the Benicio del Toro section, I think the one that really makes it for me is the Jeffrey Wright one. I think
it is really fantastic.
That's the one I think pushes from being a really fun movie to being a pretty great one for me, at least my opinion. So, but otherwise, I definitely agree with everything you said there.
I'm glad that we had to disagree on something. Like I said before, I was getting nervous. But okay, so let's get into our number 4s. We're now in the top 4 films of our list. We're getting close to the finish line, but okay. My number 4 film is one that I saw at Sundance, and I remember it was one that you were kind of like unsure if I would like. I remember you were kind of like, I don't know, John. But that is my favorite animated film of the year, and that's Crypto Zoo. I just love Crypto Zoo. The more I think about it, the more I reflect on it, the more I rewatch clips on YouTube. I love the animation style in this. It's so unique. It's so different. It's like watching like an 80s metal band album cover, but for an entire movie. And without the metal music, it marches to the beat of its own drum, to borrow a line from Vivo. But yeah, this is Dev Shah's film that he wrote and directed. It's a miracle that this exists, that he was able to make this, he's a cartoonist, I believe, and he got a good cast for this, Lake Bell, Michael Cera, and Zoe Kazan, and so many others. Like, I just think that this movie, it's such a wonderful premise. Like the world has these like creatures called cryptids. I promise has nothing to do with cryptocurrency, which is why I was a little bit nervous about watching it. But it really is just sort of about like weird but beautiful creatures just trying to coexist in a world that rejects them. It's about, the perils of trying to segregate people away from each other. Ultimately, it's a film about how togetherness and integration and being around people, even though you think you have all the differences in the world, is how we come to find love and peace and acceptance. It's just such a truly killer movie. I know that it's not everybody's favorite. It doesn't have the best, critical ratings. I don't think it's a movie that everybody agrees with me on for sure. But when I think of the most visually unique and one of the most like emotionally like striking and precise movies of the year, it absolutely is Crypto Zoo. I've talked a lot about movies that I think advance the medium. This one does that for me in terms of animation. I love seeing more animated films, really being up for adults and unapologetically. I'm really, really appreciative of that. There are very few of those in the US, and I think that it's something the US is missing out on. I think we are hitting a wave where we're starting to see more things come out, but more in a TV world for animation that is, not just comedies, but like dramas and stuff that's really deep and, interesting. Just some stuff that, wouldn't have existed 10, 15 years ago coming out today. And I think this is a promising one for the years to come. I love the creatures in this too. The creatures are so fun. Shout out to Pliny.
Pliny,
this year's best actor. Yeah. Or supporting, I guess.
One of the best characters. Yes.
But yeah, no, I know you like this one too. Not as much as me, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's not we didn't line up this time, but I do think this is kind of similar for me to French Dispatch in that I can kind of understand why people are critical of the film, but it's another film where I feel like people kind of dismiss it as being twee or like too Sundancey in a way that I just don't really understand. Like I can get like not being impressed by it or not really like being taken by like the kind of weird quirks that it has, but like you said, I think the commentary here, like on just like kind of like this flawed eco culture for like this like liberal safe haven and like this like balance between individualism and idealism is really creative and inspired. And as you mentioned, there's like this quality to it where it's like you kind of like found Dash Shaw's like notebook hiding under his desk and you open it up and you're like, what is this? And it's like, that's Pliny. It's like, what is a Pliny? And it's just like, like I think that is so inspiring to see. And even if I don't mirror the same level of enthusiasm that you have for the film, I'm so grateful to have a film like this. And it was definitely in my top 10 for sure when I saw it at Sundance, of the films I saw at Sundance. And
so back in January, a year ago?
No, I mean, of the films I saw at Sundance, yeah.
But, I thought you were saying like, like 12 months ago when I had seen 3 movies, it was in my top 10.
Yeah, I wasn't too clear. I meant of the films I saw at Sundance, it was in my top 10. But gotcha. I enjoy it a lot. I definitely appreciate it a lot. And even if I don't have the same enthusiasm that you have for this film, it does gratify me to see it on your list and seeing someone champion as much as you do.
All right. What about your number 4, Will Ashton? Let's hear it.
Yeah, so this one is a film that we have already mentioned and you have already gone at length to discuss, so I'll try to be a little tidy in my thoughts. It is The Worst Person in the World, which is, a film that I have been reflecting on quite a bit this year. It's kind of hard not to because we're trapped indoors more increasingly because of the pandemic. And because of that, I find myself very uncertain about the future and what's going to happen. And I have certainly felt a lot of anxiety about getting older, especially as I age out of my 20s. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting close. And I guess I'm trying to sort of make peace with my own sort of personal messiness and trying to get my own shit together at this point. And we've had a few films this year, I guess, thankfully and unthankfully, that have tackled these things. I know another example was Tick, Tick, Boom, which a lot of people felt quite affectionately for, and I can understand why. But for me, the best of these type of films was, as we mentioned, The Worst Person in the World, which is the third installment, as we mentioned, in Joachim's is it Joachim Tears or
Joachim Trier? Joachim Trier, I think is how you say it.
Is it Joachim?
I thought so.
Oh, okay.
Well, Joachim. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Joachim.
Sorry about that. Joachim Tears, the third film in his unofficial Oslo trilogy, which if you haven't had a chance to see Oslo August 31st, I definitely would recommend that one very much, as well as Reprise, the first film in that trilogy. But, kind of mirroring what you said before, I think this is probably the best and certainly most emotionally fulfilling installment in this little trilogy. And I think that primarily comes not only from the inventiveness of the filmmaking and how elaborate it is, but also just from this incredible lead performance from Renate Reziv. I don't ever quite know how to pronounce it, but if
Again,
I had to pick,
it's Norwegian, so it's
right.
I apologize
It
too.
is.
It's tough for us.
It's not a native tongue for me. Much surprise, I'm sure. But as you've mentioned, I think this might be my favorite performance of the year. I am already prematurely bummed that she's probably not going to get nominated for Best Actress, and someone like Nicole Kidman and being Ricardo's is. But whatever. Anyway, Worst Person in the World, as you mentioned, it's very deliberately kind of novelistic in its approach, and it mirrors sort of the scattered reflections of its character, who, the title is very ironic, obviously, but she makes a lot of bad decisions, and she's not always perfect, but, she has this sort of like emotional catharsis that feels very earned and lived in. And I feel like there's so many, like I said, uniquely memorable moments and so many wonderfully idiosyncratic moments as well that just feel very lived in and impactful in a way that few films like this ever really do. And it really wallops into this very mature and beautiful film that is, funny, and it's engaging, and it's relatable, and it's sad, and it's weird, and it's, I think, ultimately very gratifying. It kind of mirrors the highs and lows of this journey that this character feels. And, it feels like you're living in her shoes for that reason. And you ultimately she makes peace with the decisions she makes throughout the film. You, in your own personal life, at least you're like me, you can also kind of learn to kind of make peace with your own sort of messiness. So in that reason and more, I found it to be a very enriching and emboldening film. And I'm very grateful for the time I had with it. I'm very grateful for the time I've had reflecting on it. And I'm maybe less grateful for how much it reflects upon me as a person, but all the same, I'm just very glad that this movie exists and we got to see it in time to put in our own personal best of the year list.
Awesome. I don't want to give anything away, but I am wondering if we're going to have more overlap than we did last year, which would be the most overlap I think ever between us. Because last year we had 2 films overlap. That was Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, and She Dies Tomorrow. 2 great films. But this year we already have 2, and we still have 3 films to go. And I'm kind of wondering, is it going to happen this year? Are we going to beat the record that we did last? I think last year that was the record, was 2. Before that, I think we'd only had 1 uncommon usually. So that just tells you when you come to Cinemaholics, you're getting a range. But maybe not this year as much. But okay, our number 3 films of the year. I am so excited to talk about this film. It's one that it was one of my most anticipated films of 2020. It was, of course, delayed a whole year. We finally got it this past summer. This, I think, was the best summer film. Like, if I'm being literal, technically Pig came out in the summer too. And, Luca is more of like a summer movie, but this is the film that was my favorite that came out in the summer, that at least I saw in the summer. And that is The Green Knight, which, like I mentioned before, A24 had a good year, at least for me. I think this is one of the shining examples of that. This is Dev Patel just being utilized as an actor in ways that I'm just so like, thank you for understanding Dev Patel's talent, David Lowery. And I really am a big fan of David Lowery at this point too. I really enjoyed, for example, A Ghost Story and Pete's Dragon and Ain't Them Body Saints. I haven't seen Old Man and the Gun. One of these days I'll get to that so I can be a David Lowery completionist. But this movie, which retells the Green Knight story, and it's about Sir Gawain, and it's kind of just like this hyper surreal, kind of metaphorical, like dark, pitch black fable but even though it's a fable, and even though there are so many scenes in this that are just like impossible to believe what you're watching, it's all still grounded in a very human story about a person that I think too many of us are going to watch the film and be like, I relate to that person, and be upset about that fact. But at the same time, maybe there can be some catharsis to have from watching a movie like this and recognizing, the limits of our morality and the limits of what we can do as human beings, and how we can, kind of live our lives sort of like, obviously struggling to the end to try to change our fates and to try to change our destinies, but just having an acceptance that we can't fix every problem, we can't solve every issue, we can't succeed every single quest, especially the ones that are ill-fated as they are. But I think it's all about the journey, and I think that's what this movie ultimately is. It's about how the journey defines us more than anything else, even what we're journeying to achieve. It's a film about glory. It's a film about, the greed and the lust for glory being the ultimate downfall of people, and what leads to some of those tragic events that, kind of doom us, in terms of our lives, but through what I think is just like beautiful, artful, striking world that we exist in. This like King Arthur sort of like, what if King Arthur was just in like The Witcher. Basically, if I had to do like one kind of comparison point, this is sort of like a weird balance between like The Witcher and something like Game of Thrones, where it's not as if magic is like around every corner, but it's certainly there, a persistent thing in this world, and to the point where things are happening that are just so different, so esoteric, that it's just like, what am I seeing here? And as I mentioned, Dev Patel's performance in here is so good, but Alicia Vikander, who I think is just being viciously overlooked for her performance here, she gets a chance to really bring Dev Patel's performance to fruition, if you catch my drift. Also, Joel Edgerton shows up in this movie at one point and is just like blasting us away with just this incredible performance. Sean Harris comes out of nowhere in this. I just think across the board, Ralph Ineson and Barry Kagan, like people just come into this movie, they're in it for a minute and they just leave all the impression.
Little Barry being a little stinker in this movie.
That's right. As he does, as it wasn't as powerful in Eternals, but he made it count here. And I absolutely adore this movie. It is a cinematic experience unlike any other. I'm surprised it's not my number one film of the year. It probably would have been if not for the other two films on this list coming out when they did, because I think this movie is absolutely incredible. So The Green Knight. And I forget exactly where you stand on this movie, but I assume that I like it a good bit more than you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a film. I appreciate it. I do like it. I emotionally didn't get as much out of it as you and some other folks did. But to the film's credit and to David Lowery's credit, as I felt similarly to A Ghost Story and Peace Dragon, two other films you mentioned, the more I think about it, the more I think I respect what it pulled off. And obviously, as you mentioned, it's a gorgeous looking film. I mean, cinematography wise, it's probably one of the best looking films of the year. I'm definitely glad I saw this in theaters when I did. But yeah, it didn't hit me as hard as you did. I'm not quite as big into the fantasy scene, so that might be part of it. But yeah, it's a good film. I can definitely see why it's on your list and why it's on a lot of other people's lists as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fantasy thing. Yeah, the dark fantasy aspect, because I love fantasy and fantasy books. So yeah, I'm sure that's pretty indicative of like what I get out of it. And I'll say one more thing. I think this is the film that is my tragedy of Macbeth. I'll put it that way. But okay, Will, what is your number 3 film of the year? Please don't tell me it's Tragedy of Macbeth and I accidentally teed that up.
No. I'll talk about Tragedy of Macbeth later. Whether that is
tease
in my list or in my honorable mentions, you'll have to wait to find out. Okay. But no, my number 3 pick is a film I'm sure you're going to be talking about real soon, because it is Sean Baker's Red Rocket.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. My heart is full.
Yeah, not surprising that's on my list, but maybe a little surprising that it's this low, and that's, it's number 3. So there you go. So with his previous films, Tangerine and The Florida Project, Sean Baker is often focused on characters on the margins, people who are trying to make their way into a world that really just don't really seem to care about these people, and often ignores them at basically any possible time. He really brings a lot of great empathy and curiosity to these characters, which I think is one of the key reasons why they feel so tangential and, in ways that feel very deliberate and delicate. It's sort of a magic act I think he's kind of perfected with that previous film, Florida Project, and one that I think he amusingly just kind of destroys, or tries to destroy, rather, with fairly exhilarating results with Red Rocket, a much more acidic and audacious character study that brings that sort of same curiosity and human interest to a character who is ultimately far less worthy of redemption than his other subjects in his previous films. Sam Rex here is probably giving what is probably one of the most exhilarating performances of the year in a film that is just so bold and punchy and unsettling, but also madly entertaining as it journeys into the heart of Texas with this ne'er-do-well lead character who's basically just trying to hustle his way through every last connection that he has in his hometown after his adult film industry ambitions didn't quite pan out as he hoped. The results are expectedly quite scummy and debauched and, chaotic, but and also I would say fairly perverse as well, both in ways that are applied and not. But it's hard not to be transfixed by this character, Mikey Saber. He has a tendency of making very, very bad choices, and these terrible choices only get worse as he goes on throughout the film. But there's something, I would say, kind of crudely charming about the whole thing about him, his whole deal. And you find yourself, I guess, even against your best interest, sort of engage with his plight. And the result is a character study and a social commentary that seems to once again be tackling the Trump era in a very deliberate, but obviously very meaningful and thoughtful way, allowing us to see the heart of the American dream, or as I joked once before, the American cream, and how people always sort of get lured by these folks who act like they have it all together, even when the evidence seems to point to the contrary, as it does here. The results, as I mentioned, are very darkly hilarious and kind of engrossingly irreverent and relevant. In a film that just continues to resonate with me in a way that a lot of other films this year haven't quite reached those same heights. So, it's kind of hard not to admire the hustle and bustle of the film, but it just really works on its own merits. And if you're willing to engage with the film in its sort of scummy ways, I think you're really going to find a lot to appreciate. So that made it a pretty easy pick for me at number 3, Red Rocket.
Sounds great. I know we just talked about this film on the show not too long ago, so listeners can check out that conversation. And I think that we really covered it. I think with that movie, my only edit there is I'd say American Strawberries and Cream. Will, it's right there, but that's fine. You're close. All right, let's get into our number 2 films of the year. We're getting close. We're going to do our number 2s, and then we'll do our honorable mentions, and we'll finish this out with number 1. So we're about wrapping it up here. But okay, our number 2.
We'll call it a day, I guess, or a night.
We will. A whole thing, a whole year. All right, my number 2 film is Licorice Pizza. I just love this movie. Paul Thomas Anderson's latest just knockout punch of a movie. He just knows how to make movies. Like it's as simple as that. Movies of all kinds. It's amazing to me that this guy is able to make a movie like this and Phantom Thread and The Master and like There Will Be Blood. It's just like you just go through the list and you're like, this man, like what kind of filmmaker is he? He's an enigma. And I think we're all the better for it. Licorice Pizza is this deceptively small-scale movie. It takes place in the 1970s in the Valley in LA, and it's very much an LA movie, but I think it's more than that too. Because I know we've talked about it before where I just like LA is not my favorite place, but one thing that I do get a lot out of LA is my appreciation of it through the movies. When I watch movies where, LA is sort of like a character, perhaps, if you would put it that way, to be annoying about it. I think that I can judge a lot of movies by the way they depict LA. A movie like Nightcrawler, for example, really sticks out to me for the way that it's different in how it depicts LA. I think what Paul Thomas Anderson's doing here with Licorice Pizza, maybe at first glance is a little bit like I've seen this kind of movie before. But I think what he pulls off here in a more interesting way than we might expect is how he takes this sort of like quasi-romantic but /platonic relationship between a 15-year-old boy and a 25-year-old woman, and he finds a way to take these two people who should not be together, legally and ethically, and he takes a movie like that, but he shows this is why people kind of come together anyway, and how sometimes you have a bond with somebody that is indefensible, certainly, and is something that can be creepy, but he uses a whole movie to show us just sort of like what that really can mean to these two people in this time and what they can mean to each other, and kind of just doing it through these really brilliant vignettes. I mean, walking through this movie, like every section of it is just every single one is so surprising. It's unpredictable. I just feel like I'm watching something truly like masterful on display. He just has such a knack for telling stories that are interesting. Stories that, like, if anybody else tried to tell them, I think that we would hate. We'd be like, this is terrible. And I know this movie's gotten a lot of slack. I think some people have said that, like, oh, it's getting a pass. I was like, it's only because Paul Thomas Anderson directed it that people are like hyping it up. And I could not disagree more. I think that this movie really is incredible. And obviously not everybody has to like it or love it, but I do think that it offers something truly, truly not useful, I guess, and not even insightful, but just sort of just thought-provoking. It gives you so much thought about people in general and this time and place. And like I said before, how people can kind of connect to each other, even if they don't go together super well, or they, taking kind of two characters who are totally different ages but showing all of these parallels between what they're going through, this kid who wants to grow up too fast, this woman who feels like she's never going to grow up, and just sort of showing like the opposites of that and heightening it in a way that is just so moving to me. Because I think as dreamlike as this movie is, and as like, it is one of the most like escapist films, as I was kind of referencing earlier, it is escapist, but at the same time, I think it's also revealing a lot of like human core truths about who we are and where we belong in the world and all that stuff. So yeah, Licorice Pizza, it's just like, if you watch a movie this year, this has got to be one of them, because I think that it's, like it or love it, I think it's going to have an impact that is definitely important. It's definitely one of the more essential movies of the year, I think, for that reason.
Hell yeah.
That's all you got? That's all you want to say? Well, I
have a lot more to say, but I don't want to tip my hand.
You don't want to? Oh, hey, I understand that. That's totally respectable. So why don't we jump into then our number 2 film, or your number 2 film of the year?
Sure. So this one I don't expect to be on your list. If it is, I'll be very surprised. Well, I mean, I know your list mostly at this point, so I would be very surprised if it's on your list. But anyway, my number 2 film is one that I don't think a lot of people have on their radar, but it's one that really stuck with me for a whole year now, in a way that I feel like a lot of people aren't giving it enough credit, and that is All Light Everywhere. And wow. I'll say...
this is a lot higher up than I thought it would be. I forgot that you had that on your list at one point.
Oh yeah, no, it's quite a good film, and so I saw this one, as I mentioned before, at Sundance, and I don't think I watched it at the time under maybe the best circumstances. I caught it pretty late at night. It was the last film I saw, maybe like the 4th or 5th day at Sundance. And when I pressed play, I wasn't quite sure it was going to be able to give it my full and undivided attention. I tried to with every film we review on this show, but, sometimes it doesn't quite happen for extraneous purposes. But any fears of that sort were quickly dismissed as soon as I started the film, which I find to be quite an alarmingly and appropriately revealing look at surveillance. It's a film that I feel like combines the subjective and objective lens with really impressive and commendable ease, especially as director Theo Anthony expertly nuanced documentary is unable to be like anything else I've seen this year, or really any other year, especially in terms of its formal convolutions and also its deep-seated meditations on what it really means to be under constant surveillance, and also being a filmmaker who has to kind of dictate the narrative in that respect. I feel like this film not only reveals the depths to which our trust can be shattered, especially in a police system that frankly just doesn't always look out for the best interests of its citizens, but also the ways in which cinema and narrative storytelling as art forms can perhaps be mischieving. Yeah, no, I was right before. What am I trying to say? It's late.
Not mischieving, mysterious, mystique. What are you doing? What's happening?
I'm combusting.
This movie is that good.
Yeah, no, I mean it is. Yes, mischievous. I don't know what I don't know. Misleading, I think, is what the word I was looking for.
Okay, we'll reboot that.
There you go. To me, it's a pretty astounding film. It's, I guess, fittingly ironic, fairly oblique in that it is at once eye-opening and deceiving. It can be argued, I guess, that Theo Anthony is being too broad in terms of like what he's trying to focus here. I think some people might perceive that to be a limitation of the film, but I think his willingness and eagerness to be exploring such a wide-ranging thesis is ultimately very compelling and thrilling to me. This is the sort of film that, after seeing so many documentaries that tend to follow a fairly conventional talking head narrative focus approach, it just makes those look amateurish, because the layers that I think Anthony is able to find with the very nature of human evolution and mirroring that with technology's evolution is very sinister, but also very illuminating. And I think it kind of gets to the root of what compelling cinema should and could be. It's a documentary that it's pretty thorough and pretty dense, and I can understand why people are not going to really want to give it the time of day or really critically reflect on the film too much. But I just think it's simply one of the best films of the year, and certainly my favorite documentary of the year. And while ironically and depressingly, I feel like it's getting fairly overlooked, if you have the chance to see on Hulu, I think it's well worth your time and attention. So that is All Light Everywhere.
Yeah, like even though I don't really like it nearly as much as you do, it's pretty low on my top of the year, but I gotta say, with this documentary, I think that it's cool. It's just like a cool documentary. It's about a cool subject, but kind of a depressing subject at the same time. And yeah, I can definitely understand, the response that you're having to it. It's certainly a movie that I think hit you at a certain time that was just right. And maybe that just wasn't the case for me. I don't know. I think I saw this at night as well, but I don't think it was as late. But yeah, I wish I liked it more. But it is certainly a good piece of filmmaking, good piece of documentary filmmaking that I think a lot of people should check out, because I think it is an important subject to be sure. But this is the moment you've been waiting for. We're going to get into our number ones. First, as always, we're going to start with our honorable mentions. We're going to knock these out. These are films that made it into around like our top 30 or so that we just want to mention for whatever reason, and it can be all the hidden gems and whatnot. And one thing I got to mention right off the bat here is that this is an interesting, like, I'm looking at our list right now because we didn't know each other's lists. We had like vague impressions because you sent me your top 10 which is different from what it is right now because you saw more stuff, and vice versa. Same for me back when we were doing the best films of the year for the young folks. And yeah, just this solidifies for me. This is a bit of more of an indie kind of year for us. Those are the movies we responded the most to. And that's always fun to see. I think the film here with the biggest budget by far is Luca. And for you, I think the biggest budget, I don't even know. Is it Annette?
No, it's probably
The French Dispatch.
It's probably my number one film, which I haven't revealed yet.
Oh yeah, that's right. We haven't gone to your number one, so I wonder what it's going to be. I'm so curious.
Oh boy, what could it be?
Last Night in Soho. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Okay, so honorable mention time. I'll go through mine real fast since I give you a little bit of a break here. But yeah, my honorable mentions, they're all over the place in terms of like subjects matter and like different things. And I'm definitely happy with these movies and just sort of the year in general. I'll just say that. But I'm Your Man. I definitely for a while was in my top 20. West Side Story. Really, really dug Spielberg's West Side Story. I would include Judas and the Black Messiah here, even though it feels like a 2020 movie, even though we both saw it 2021. But yeah, just one of those movies because of the Oscars. It feels like we already kind of went through that. Power of the Dog, which I think is at this point probably a front runner up with Belfast to be Best Picture, and I think Jane Campion could be getting her next Oscar for this one. Bo Burnham Inside, which we talked about. Bergman Island, which we talked about, of course. Shiva Baby, love Shiva Baby, so good. Just a wonderful like tight film. Like that's one of those gems that I just think that I'm always gonna have in the back of my mind when somebody's looking for a film. It's just like gonna get the job done. My favorite superhero film of the year was The Suicide Squad. And I think by a decent margin. Spider-Man No Way Home is not in my honorable mentions. It's not far from my honorable mentions, but yeah, it's just not there. It's in like my top 40 around there. But Suicide Squad is in my top 25. I think that film just... is exactly what I want from superhero movies, just a me kind of thing. Petite Maman, Celine Sciamma's latest film. Not as great as Portrait of a Lady on Fire, of course, but certainly worth checking out. King Richard, which I just thought was so just satisfying on every level. And I think Will Smith, if he gets the Oscar, deserves it. Riders of Justice, which I wish could have gotten into my top 20. It was pretty close. And another film that deconstructs, sort of the revenge fantasy trope. Probably the best film this year about found families. That's like really about that. The Summit of the Gods, another great animated film. Yeah, again, great year for animation. That's a film that's animated and it's for adults. Very worth checking out. Superior, based on the short film, but it's extended. I think. I guess I shouldn't count Superior on the count of three, since those didn't really get releases. Actually, Superior might have, and I've just forgot.
I wasn't 100% sure if Superior got released or not, so I wasn't going to call you out, but if you're going to call yourself out, check. Yeah.
And then Encanto. I thought Encanto was really, really good. A really great Disney film and really good music too. Some of my favorite songs of the year. I'd say Doce de Guitas is probably my favorite song of 2021. Spencer, probably one of the Kristen Stewart, one of my favorite actress performances of the year would be, if not for Worst Person in the World. Benedetta, which I absolutely love, as you know. Just that movie just hit me exactly in the right way. Paul Verhoeven, what a filmmaker. Plan B, my favorite like straight up comedy. Like there's other films above this that are technically comedies, but more as a subgenre, right? But Plan B, at least especially like as a teen comedy, blew me away in terms of its humor and its heart, and loved Plan B quite a bit. The Mitchells versus the Machines. I know a movie not you didn't love at all, but that Netflix movie just it hit me just right. I really like, I think that's probably the funniest movie of the whole year, and certainly one of the best animated. It's really close, like between that, Luca and Crypto Zoo, and so many others. I just thought we got so many good animated films this year. I don't care what you say, Will. The French Dispatch, which you already talked at length about, and I did got to touch on it. Summer of Soul, which I'm so sad. It was in my top 10 for so long. It just got pushed down a bit, but yeah, I absolutely loved Summer of Soul. What a movie, what a film. And the movie that was my number one for most of this year, which I'm not counting here because it didn't get a release date this year as I was hoping. So I'm not talking about it here. It's not even really an honorable mention, but One for the Road, if it did have its release date, it would be in my top 10. It'd probably be my number 2 film of the year above Licorice Pizza, but it's not. One for the Road, great film, but we'll have to touch on that more next year, I suppose. You saw it too. So down the line, we'll probably get to that. But those are my honorable mentions. Will, you are up.
All right. Yeah. I thought we had to limit the number of honorable mentions that we had, so my list is a little bit shorter.
Apologies.
No, you're good. I didn't know if we had a cutoff or not. So as I mentioned before, Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy got really close to putting that in my top 10. I think I just need to stew on it a little bit more. That might eventually knock out Titane or Titan. It's likewise, Shiva Baby was on my list for quite a long time, and it just barely eked its way out. I saw that film at TIFF in 2020. It stuck with me for quite a while. I like that movie, as you mentioned, quite a lot. Another Sundance documentary that I really enjoyed, that I feel is being sorely overlooked, is The Most Beautiful Boy in the World. Likewise, a film I saw at Sundance that I liked it a lot is Judas and the Black Messiah, as you mentioned. Also, the Hulu exclusive In and of Itself, a film that I went into fairly blind, as we discussed on the show, and I found it to be quite surprised, so I really appreciate that one. Likewise, another Sundance documentary I really liked, President, centered around the Zimbabwe presidential election. A really good piece of film journalism, and unfortunately quite an infuriating film for a number of reasons, intentionally so, I should mention. So really, if you have a chance, check that one out. Benedetta, the Paul Verhoeven film, that was also on your list. Like that one a lot. Good, giddy, fun, unholy time that was. The Hand of God, the Netflix film. Just quite a film. That's all I'll say for now.
I was wondering if it would make the top 10. Okay.
No, not quite. No, it's probably, I don't know, would that be the top 20 or at least like top 30? Tragedy Macbeth. Maybe a film I'll like more as I reflect on it and see it more, hopefully. But for now, like it a lot. Definitely one that's easily in my honorable mentions, just not quite in my top 10. Likewise, film you mentioned, Summer of Soul. Really good Sundance documentary as well, and one that could very well win the Oscar, and I think fairly deservingly so. The Disciple, another film I saw at TIFF back in 2020, a film that I know I liked a little bit more than you did, but it's on Netflix, and Netflix is really just not giving it the proper due. So if you can check that one out.
And it's grown on me.
Yeah, it's that's a film that definitely has grown on me a lot. A movie you mentioned that was on your list, Crypto Zoo. Also another film that you mentioned in your honorable mentions, The Power of the Dog. Also, I really enjoyed The Humans and Stillwater, the Tom McCarthy film. Also, The Souvenir Part 2, Petite Maman, which you mentioned, as well as West Side Story, as you mentioned as well. And then I also got Flea, About Endlessness, the Roy Anderson film. I don't think we've talked about that one on the show before. This one I might need your help pronouncing. Kio Vadas Ida. I don't think I'm saying that right at all, but I apologize.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay.
Sorry.
And Spencer. So those are my honorable mentions.
I'm a fan of a lot of those movies for sure. Yeah. So I heard a lot. I was just like, yeah, good movie. Only a few where I'm just like, that one I didn't like as much, but that's fine. That's how it happens. In fact, I think that this year we were on like a very similar wavelength compared to previous years, which is alarming to say the least. Probably terrible news, probably a bad omen, but we'll have to persevere anyway. All right. So those are our honorable mentions. Lots of good stuff there, but let's just get into our number one films of 2021. And I'll start with mine. And this solidifies that this is the year with the most overlap between us, because my number one is Red Rocket, which I think you knew was coming because it's been firmly my number one for a while now. And I looked into this while you were talking and stuff, but I looked at our previous top 10s, And this is by far, us having three films, three of the same films on our list. That's a first. Never had that before. We've had one film in common, and we've had two films in common about half the time. And so it is interesting to me. It really is that like this was the year, because I feel like we had so many different kinds of movies, and I saw more movies this year. We both did, right? Like we both saw more movies than ever, and yet we have more overlap than usual. So I don't know what to make of that. But anyway, Red Rocket's my favorite film of the year. You already mentioned Simon Rex's performance in this, and just Sean Baker, really solidifying himself as, I think, one of the, not just one of the best filmmakers working right now, but I do think that he is one of the most important and essential, because I think what Sean Baker is doing, unlike many other filmmakers of his generation, he's a guy, I think, in his like late 40s, he is developing a style. Like he is developing his own cinematic language that certainly is not like whole cloth. He didn't invent it. And there was a great video on Cinefix that I think really crystallized this for me in a very profound way that I think has really stuck with me. He is creating the American neorealist film in a way that I think we've seen before. I think it reminds me of Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. That was one of your favorite films of last year, I want to say.
My number one last year.
Your number one, yeah. And I think that is an American neorealist film. I think The Florida Project, Tangerine, these are movies that are essentially taking what was so striking and innovative about the Italian neorealism film post-World War II and essentially doing the same thing in the US. It's sort of taking what American culture is really like and taking these huge risks with virtually unknown actors a lot of the time, or actors you wouldn't expect, and putting them in roles that you wouldn't expect and telling stories about people that are emotionally distanced, but also varied. Because you can watch a movie like Florida Project, which is so distressing. You can watch, like you already mentioned, Red Rocket. When you really break down what this film is, it's distressing. It hurts to watch this movie. But it's a movie with humor in it. It's a movie that you watch and you enjoy watching it, but you're watching something that should be making you mad or sad or stressed out. But instead, in my sense, this is kind of the thing that I think movies like Uncut Gems, which I really appreciate. It wasn't my favorite film by far of that year, but where Uncut Gems kind of lost me, it was like, okay, you're telling a story about America as it is without what I was kind of hoping for, like an ingredient that I think would make it come together. And that's just the sense of it all, like how it all lands, how it all kind of comes together. Kind of, not to, harp on that movie at all, but I'm just sort of like highlighting why a movie like this, which is of a piece in terms of like, it's about a despicable person and kind of trying to like unpack what that means for them. I think that Red Rocket just does something that I want more from films in general, which is depicting the American person and the relationship between these predatory people and the innocence that America like projects to itself. Because everybody can watch this movie, see this character who calls herself Strawberry, and get the metaphor that she is quite literally somebody who, at first appearance is this innocent, person that you think like whole future ahead of her, but she willingly steps into this sort of despicable sort of like orbit of this person. And it's her choice. And I think it's just I think Sean Baker is just so good at taking, not metaphors really, but just taking stories about people. They have other layers to them. I know I talked about this a lot very recently on our episode, but I just have to reemphasize that he is telling a story about what America is right now in a more honest way than ever. That is not just about the Trump era, but it's sort of about like why the Trump era, and why there are people, it doesn't do it in a dismissing way. It doesn't gawk at its subjects. It doesn't do it in a way that's like overtly political or partisan. But like at the same time, there's a great quote from a movie I just watched called Bergman Island, I think it was, where somebody was like, I'm apolitical. I want to please everybody. Or no, that was Parallel Mothers. I'm mixing things up a bit. And by the way, we didn't mention, I did see Memoria as well. Didn't make my honorable mentions, but good film.
I was curious where you landed on that film.
Good movie. Yeah, just not one of my favorites, but
very excited to see
very
that.
Good Tilda Swinton performance, yeah. But, this idea of like, there's being apolitical, which essentially just means you're a coward. You just don't really want to have a point of view because you want to please everybody. And there is what I think Red Rocket is, which is like, yeah, it has a point of view, but that point of view can be dissected and analyzed and unpacked in so many unique, blissful ways, despite being through this like just one performance out of any other. Simon Rex, who I just think what he's doing in this is just so miraculous. I cannot believe that this actor had it in him, and it makes it look easy. I also have to shout out Chris Burgach, who co-wrote the script. I think the script is so close to just being like, there is no perfect script, but it's just so close to perfect for me, because I just don't think it misses any beats. I think there's a lot of, like with Florida Project, people are split on the ending, you know, because I think that speaks to what I was saying earlier. People want a specific thing from the ending. They don't get it. And I think that that's what I love about it. I think that it, like Florida Project, it ends in a way that is like, whoa, what was that? You know, and you actually have to like sit with it. It's kind of like we were talking about with Sopranos. That's why I really like the Sopranos ending, because it's just not clear cut. You kind of have to put yourself into it, not just read something out of it. And I just wish more films were like that. So I love seeing Red Rocket. I love this movie for the filmmakers it's going to inspire. The people who are going to watch this and Florida Project and Tangerine and Starlet and all those and be like, I can make a film. I have like an emotional understanding with this filmmaker. I can do this too. And I'm really happy for all the filmmakers that he inspires. I think Sean Baker is just doing great work. The fact that he made this film kind of, you know, he had it in his back pocket. He and Burach had it in a drawer, and they made this instead of something else because of COVID. And I think we're pretty fortunate that they just had this sitting in the back of their heads for so long, and they made it happen. The stars aligned, and here we are. Red Rocket, my favorite film of 2021. And very happy about that. And
nice.
It's cool that it's high up for you too. Number 3. I wasn't expecting that, but that thrills me.
I don't know why you weren't expecting it. I was quite favorable on the film. I mean, I'm pretty much in line with everything you said there. I guess, a little bit higher in my estimation on Uncut Gems, but I do agree that I do think the Safdie brothers and Sean Baker are pretty much contemporaries in that they have this sort of spontaneous feel to their films, and certainly the way that those films are made have quite a deal of spontaneity to them. But at the same time, there is something very precise and very thoughtful about how they present their films that really comes together in a, like you said, fairly miraculous way. And so both those films are quite good, and I'm definitely very understanding for why you put Red Rocket as high as you did, and I'm not far from it. So yeah, sounds
great. And I forgot to mention too, that's that other A24 film. And I don't know what it is about me and A24. It just feels like almost every year, summer A24 films tend to be my number one. This is not a summer film, but it did premiere at Cannes, so it's close. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's my number one.
We are a couple of film bros, so we have to like the A24 films.
Yeah, we don't have a choice. It's in our contracts.
Yeah, it is our contract. You know, Disney, whatever, for every reason, they're the ones that are doing the contracts as well. We have to love the superhero movies, and we have to love the A24 movies.
And that's why your number one film is Black Widow.
Yeah, what if?
What if? That's your favorite film.
Yeah. What if?
Disney Plus show. What if?
Right.
Okay, Will Ashton. No more cut. Let's cut to the chase.
Yeah. No more clowning around. It is a film that is also on your list, very high, and I don't think it's going to come as a big surprise because it is Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza.
Speaking of a Safdie brother, by the way, that's four films. We had 4 films overlap this year. That's double what we usually have.
I was gonna say something, but I didn't want to spoil the fun. So yeah, Licorice Pizza. You know, what can I say about this film? I find it weird that even though Paul Thomas Anderson's my favorite filmmaker, I have a hard time describing what it is about Paul Thomas Anderson's films that are so wonderful. It's something weird where it's just like it's very easy to be verbose about his films. There's something that they elicit such passionate responses, but I have trouble verbalizing what it is that makes me feel so deeply about these films. Like they travel so deep into my subconscious. They kind of bury themselves into my mind in very clear and present ways. And it's easy to kind of point out the like technical prowess of the film. You mentioned a lot of it already, but I mean, Anderson, he's only continuing to adapt as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, and I think he's only becoming more of an expert in his formalistic approach. I mean, obviously, I think there are a lot of clear ways in which like his characters are getting stronger. I think his empathy is getting better. I think his confidence in allowing things to kind of play out a little bit more naturalistically, but also still being very stylistic and true to his style makes it clear that he is evolving in very clear and meaningful ways. But I mean, when it comes to a movie like Licorice Pizza, which I mean, has received no shortage of scrutiny online, as we mentioned, with all the discourse. But I think what makes it so enriching and so spellbinding to me is that there's something obviously very adolescent about the film, but there's that exuberance that comes from that adolescent feeling, as if like you're almost sort of seeing a film for the first time. It's a very rare and odd feeling, especially for two people like us who watch so many films so regularly. But a film like this, which it's an incredibly hard film to make. I mean, especially because it's one of the first films I believe that was made during the onset of the pandemic. I mean, if it wasn't the first, it was certainly among the first. But the ease in which that Anderson commands the style and form of the film, certainly including his control of his newcomer actors, in this case Cooper Hoffman and Lotte Hyam, and eases them into the film with these seasoned veterans like Bradley Cooper and Sean Penn and Joseph Cross, and as you mentioned, Benny Safdie and Tom Waits. It's really astounding. And there's like a kind of hangdog feel to this, hangout film that it feels so lived in and historically accurate, but also just very emotionally vulnerable and very searching in ways that are kind of hard to pinpoint exactly, but just feel so accurate and feel so meaningful and feel so true to life in a way that, even though there is obviously this very dreamlike quality to a lot of his films, like it's not to say these movies are very realistic, but it just feels like when you walk into them, you feel like everything makes sense and everything is right, even when there is that chaos, even when there is that kind of like channeling sense of just like dread and suspense that kind of builds up. I mean, Anderson has evoked his influences quite a lot in his previous films. Certainly, I mean, Martin Scorsese in his earlier works, as well as Robert Downey Sr., who the film is dedicated to this time. He's found great success with mimicking their films, but I find it so fascinating that he is clearly trying to evoke Altman in this film. I think this is probably his most Altman-esque film, even more so than Magnolia, but as I mentioned before, it only continues to stay true to his own voice. And I think that's something that becomes more and more apparent with each successive film of his. There's that sort of like woozy, wonderful feeling of just following your friend and kind of indulging in this kind of reckless passions that they have, and just celebrating the general camaraderie of being with your collaborators and just doing something that feels sort of reckless, but just feels right to yourself. I think at the core of the film, and a lot has been said about this, I'm not really trying to add to the discourse in that way, but for me, the parallels and the ways that they divert from one another, in this case, Gary Valentine, who has this sort of reckless determination, this endless hustling desire to escape his age, be older than he is, kind of adopt adulthood prematurely, alongside Alana, who is obviously very adrift, who is becoming more and more uncertain about what she wants to be, even as she is getting older and more into her 20s, in this case, the back half of her 20s. That parallel where they have these two characters who are unable to really find exactly what they're looking for, and they have that sort of connection that is very taboo, but also feels very intertwined. That sort of reckless indulgence and that adolescent desire to have those entangling feelings is obviously very complex. But at the same time, I think Paul Thomas Anderson accomplishes that feel in a way that feels very knowledgeable and very lived in and exact, but he understands these characters. He doesn't really talk down to them or feels like he's like condemning them, even when they do very bad or potentially dangerous things. He's just celebrating that sort of messiness in a way that the film isn't messy as a result. I mean, obviously the narrative isn't streamlined and people have been critical of that, but it just feels so euphoric in a way that I think the best films can be. It just kind of feels like you're in this kind of blissful state of being in a grand cinematic world. And even though the film isn't super epic in its approach, it feels what you want out of cinema because it has all those kind of tender nuances in a very crisp celluloid cinematic way that's just very spellbinding, very, very entertaining, but also just a very rich and poignant film. And, you know, it's the type of film that makes you realize why you love watching films in the first place. If you want to be pedantic or cliche or whatever the word might be. It's a very, very increasingly rare cinematic experience to get something like this. And it's something that I want to celebrate quite openly and consistently for that reason. So therefore, it's pretty easily my number one favorite film of the year.
All right, Licorice Pizza. Just what a good film. And I'm kind of thinking, I didn't realize, I wasn't even thinking this movie would have a big budget, but you were right, $40 million budget, which is one of the biggest budgets between the two of us, just in general. I think Luca is the only other one that I think has a bigger budget. I think Luca's probably around 100 million or so. And yeah, everything else we have is like tens of million, you know, like maybe I think Annette's like 15 million. Red Rocket's probably less than 10. I don't even know, but that's fine. Who cares? As long as the movie's great. I mean, Green Knight, I actually forgot to look into Green Knight. I imagine that budget, I think that budget's like 20 to 30 million.
I think it's 15 million.
Is it? We're about to find out right now.
Had a tweet that said it was 15 million.
Right.
Yeah.
Isaac, we can count on Isaac. That's for sure. But what a year for low budget films, I guess, in that respect. They certainly kept us going throughout the whole year, as it is clearly apparent. But that'll do it for our top 10 movies of 2021. That was, as always, a ton of fun. I feel like we really covered the year in film and what these films meant to us. And that's it. I have no closing thoughts. I guess we can just get on out of here, Will Ashton. We got stuff to do.
Sure. I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I just hope next year is even better.
That's right. So, next week on the show, we will be talking about Scream 2022, the new Scream movie. Can't wait to talk about that film. I'm chomping at the bit to really get into that one. I cannot wait. And I'm anxious for you to watch it so we can talk about it, not just on the show, but in general.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be the tiebreaker film for me because I love Scream 1 and I really like Scream 2. I'm not crazy about Scream 3 and have mixed feelings about Scream 4, but I'm probably overdue.
This could push it. Who knows? I liked it though. So, here's the problem, Bill. I liked it, so you're probably going to hate it. Actually, that's not really. Actually, I don't know, because it seems like we're pretty aligned on the Scream franchise so far. So it would be the first time we disagree. So it's going to be a first no matter what.
We'll talk about it next week.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
That's it for us this week. We'll see you all. Thanks as always for listening. It's been a great year. Here's to 2022. Let's do it. I'm John Negroni from the Internet, California.
And from the Internet, Pennsylvania, I'm Washington.
See you next time.